The February 16th, 2021 regular meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board will come to order at 5 p.m. All rise. Vice President Sanowski, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The board will have a roll call starting from the chair's right.
Zach Lindsay.
Libby Hartwell.
Patty Beckman. Julie Sanowski.
Jan Michael Greenberg. All board members are present and there is a quorum. The board will move to the approval of the agenda as presented. Are there any amendments? The chair moves to approve the agenda as presented. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Board member Hartwell's seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve the agenda as presented. Is there any further debate? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will move to public comments notification. Those wishing to address the governing board on consent or non-agenda matters do not need to request permission in advance. However, you must complete the blue card or white card at the table in the back, and please present it to our board secretary, Gladys Wagner. There is a 3-minute speaking limit. The board will now move on to agenda item 4, student and staff recognitions and celebrations. Dr. Menzel.
Good evening, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, and members of the governing board. Yesterday, we celebrated the federal holiday that honors our past presidents, leaders of their times. Today, in our monthly celebrations and in an agenda presentation that will follow, we are pleased to recognize some of SUSD's unsung heroes whose leadership is key to our success, as well as several of our high school students who are already well on their way to shaping their leadership skills. Our Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, Dr. Melissa Sackos, is going to kick things off for us this evening. Dr. Sackos.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Good afternoon, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, governing board members, and Ms. Wagner. Before we get things underway, I'd like to take a moment to recognize some very important people, SUSD VIPs, if you will, whose work we don't always note as having started with them. I'm talking about our middle school and high school counselors. The results of counselors' endeavors are mostly readily found in our students, and not necessarily now, but in some time in the future, such as when our middle school grades start asking the question, what do I want to do when I grow up? And how do I get there? And in our high school students who often ask their counselors, what do I have to do to get into Stanford to study business? And I would like to draw. What are my career options? And can I make any money doing that? SUSD's stated mission is ensuring all individuals reach their full potential. Their full potential is the very definition of what our counselors do each and every day. As an integral part of the education system, these dedicated professionals help students identify and explore their interests, strengths, and talents, and help them set realistic goals. They also work with parents on ways to further their students' educational, personal, and social growth. We want to take this opportunity to recognize our middle school and our high school counselors, and thank you, Governing Board, for making it possible for SUSD students to have this tremendous amount of resources supporting our students. Thank you. And counselors do hold a very special place in my heart. Moving on, I'd like to have a couple of people join me at the podium now. They are Scottsdale Math and Science Academy Coordinator, Susan Lindberg. Saguaro High School Junior, Natalie Foster. And Miss Ann Oxinger, Principal of Saguaro High School. Please socially distance. You come over here. On January 22nd, the Girls Inspiring Girls arm of the Saguaro Robotics team hosted more than 100 girls, and probably some brothers too, for the 3rd annual Sisters in STEM night, virtually. Susan and Natalie are going to tell us a little bit about that and how you go from an event that usually takes place in the wide open spaces of a Saguaro High School cafeteria to an online event. Ms. Lindbergh.
This is our third year of our Saguaro Sisters in STEM, which is a student-generated and student-run event for young girls and the brothers too, to have an evening of STEM fun. And this year it was like starting from scratch because we had to do it all on Zoom. Natalie Foster took charge and has such a can-do attitude. She's just incredible. She has management skills, leadership skills. She makes spreadsheets color-coded. It's amazing. And I will let her tell you more about the evening. This is not the only thing Natalie does, though, but this meeting is too short to really get into everything. So, Natalie?
Thank you, Ms. Lindbergh. Hello, everyone. My name is Natalie Foster, and I'm a junior at Saguaro High School. I was the event coordinator for Sisters in STEM this year. And Sisters in STEM was an event that was created to help introduce girls to the world of STEM. Now, typically, like we said, the event's hosted at Saguaro, and we open up our cafeteria. We set up a multitude of experiments that kids can participate in, but due to COVID, we held our third annual Sisters in STEM virtually. The first step we took was to go through all of the STEM disciplines that we had covered in previous years and choose a select few that would give kids a really good taste of the STEM world. We chose biology, chemistry, math, environmental science, physics, and engineering. We then chose and put together 1 to 2 experiments for each discipline, as well as a lesson that taught students about what was going on. Now, this really engaged these kids while still teaching them about the different areas of STEM. We also had a guest speaker come in and talk about what it's like to be a woman in a STEM field. It was very successful as we had 155 students and 107 parents attend the event. Students were even asking us, when's the next event going to be? I had emails coming in of parents saying the event was wonderful. And one family, their Saturdays became Science Saturdays. Now, I want to say thank you so much to our Saguaro community, as this event could not have happened without the support of our staff and wonderful volunteers, which include Sydney Lowry, Parker Marriott, Allie Pickett, Critton Mandala, Zoe Daly, Elon Podolsky, Owen Barker, Sean Little, Nikhil Sethi, Lindsay Baptiste, Sandra Ranger, Jacqueline Lobianco, Nina Hamill, Ben Nearing, Grace Ornstein, Mitchell Fessmer, Kenan McAndrews, Lily Weinstock, Julia Reeves, Emily Ramirez, Tatum Hennessy, Amutha R., Delia Riley, Sophia and Bella Will, Alex Stevenson, Arohi G., Kennedy Kreibel, Jake Weiss, Kayla Battelle, and Ellie Arnold. Thank you all so much for your support, and I am so happy that I had the opportunity to spread the world of STEM to girls in our community.
Thank you, Natalie, and your team of STEM volunteers, and Susan for guiding their work on another successful event and helping instill in our younger students, especially our young girls, the love of science, technology, engineering, and math. And with that, I have a couple of coins. You're going to get yours later. This first one goes to Ms. Lindbergh. Congratulations. I would do the trying to not a hug, but and to you now. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Dr. Sackos, and congratulations, Saguaro, on another successful STEM event, and thank you for your fine work every day with students, SUSD counselors, who have a hand every day in inspiring our students to dream big. We're calling this next celebration, quote, "The wheels on the bus go round and round." We all remember that children's song, right? SUSD Transportation Director Brendan Wagner is going to drive this celebration for us. Mr. Wagner, you don't have to sing. Actually, we'd prefer you don't. But please come up and share the good news with the board.
Come on up, guys. Good evening, Mr. President, board members, Dr. Menzel. I appreciate having the opportunity tonight to introduce Mr. Johnny Williams, our fleet operations supervisor, and 2 of our 10 school bus mechanics, Mr. Sam Aguilar and Mr. Andrew White. We just completed our annual DPS school bus inspection of 150 vehicles. with great success, despite the challenges brought about by COVID and our driver and aid shortages. But what makes me most proud is that under the leadership of Johnny Williams, these gentlemen treat every day like it's inspection day and look at every bus every day, knowing that lives depend upon their expertise, knowledge, and instincts in keeping these buses in optimal condition. I don't sing. I don't know if Johnny does, but I'm going to turn it over to him to talk a little bit about the inspection and his crew.
First of all, thank you guys for recognizing us. It's a lot of hard work, but it's rewarding work. I couldn't do it without my crew. They're the biggest part of why we are. And just thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you.
And I guess we have coins also.
We do have coins. If you could give those at this point in time to Johnny, Sam, and Andrew, we would appreciate that. And then the rest are for the remainder of the crew that weren't able to join us in person this evening.
Okay.
But this recognizes the excellence of your work and your dedication to ensuring the safe transportation of our students every day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Some big customers of the transportation's fine work are our high school athletic teams. So this gives us an opportunity to congratulate the 41 seniors from Arcadia, Chaparral, Desert Mountain, and Saguaro High Schools who signed national letters of intent to play their sports at the next level next school year. So go SUSD student athletes, and we are very proud of them. Lastly, there are a couple of other students we want to celebrate this evening. We want to congratulate the 11 sopranos, 11 altos, 8 tenors, and 6 bass baritones from our middle school vocal groups who have been named to the Arizona Music Educators Association Junior High All-State Choir. They will perform at the state festival with other middle school vocalists from around the state on March 20th. And I ask, is that going to be a live or virtual event? And apparently it will be virtual, and they're still working out the details, but it will be very exciting, I am sure. Additionally, we'd like to, at the high school level, recognize guitarist Beyond Levinson and trumpeter Sebastian Brock from Arcadia High School, who have been named to the Arizona Band and Orchestra Association's All-State Jazz Band. Congratulations, gentlemen. It is truly amazing that despite all of the challenges our students face every day, they still have music firmly and prominently placed in their hearts, and with the support of their outstanding teachers, engage in these musical art endeavors that we look forward to sharing again with them soon. So on behalf of Scottsdale Unified School District, congratulations to all of our performing artists that have been recognized at the state level.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel, and congratulations to all tonight. The board will now move to agenda item 5, superintendent's comments. Dr. Menzel?
Thank you, President Greenberg and members of the governing board. There are just a couple of things that I would like to add. It's really enjoyable to do the celebrations, and so then it's really anticlimactic when I get to make a few remarks after that. But there were 2 other things that I think are important to highlight, and the first is that we had our bond sale on last Thursday, February 11th. We sold $61,655,000 worth of school improvement bonds tied to the 2016 bond initiative. This is the last bond sale related to that approval of the voters. And what was pretty impressive is, I think you recall, is the demand for the district's bonds were pretty significant. Actually, there was a request for $369,125,000, 6 times oversubscribed compared to what we were looking for. The true interest cost associated with those bonds is 1.581%, which is an all-time historical low rate for bonds issued by the district. These bonds, as you may recall, will be used to help renovate school facilities, purchase pupil transportation vehicles, upgrade educational technology, and pay the cost of issuing the bonds. So when we look at the benefit to the taxpayer, because of the competitive interest and the market rate, it's a win-win for the district, for the students who will benefit from the improved facilities, and for the taxpayer in terms of the reduced interest costs. So it's something definitely we're celebrating. The final thing that I would just like to note, as we've talked about over the last 8 or 9 months, is that we're about to embark on our strategic planning effort. And on tomorrow, our strategic planning design team will meet for the first time. And we've got 43-plus volunteers from within the school system and the community who are willing to engage, roll up their sleeves to help lead the work. But I want to be sure that the members of our school district and the larger public know that there will be multiple opportunities for input and participation, because developing a preferred future for Scottsdale Unified School District that's future-focused and works to ensure that our students are able to achieve their full potential requires engaging the broad community in articulating what that vision is. So we look forward to starting the process and know that as a group, we will be engaging the broader community on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Dr. Mensah. Are there any comments? The board will now move to agenda item 6, public comments. Those wishing to address the governing board will be limited to 3 minutes to speak, and the time should be listed on the boards. Our first speaker tonight is Sue Tucker.
And I run the library at Cochise Elementary. I have been an Instructional Resource Assistant, IRA, for almost 14 years. The first 6 years as an assistant to a teacher librarian, and the remaining 7.5 by myself. The IRA is a classified position, and in 2007, elementary school certified teacher librarians with classified assistants were both replaced by a full-time classified IRA. My job supports all the teachers and students on the campus with library, instructional, and technical resources. I understand that Shannon Crozier is speaking this evening about proposed salaries and benefits for next school year, and I would like to request that consideration be given to reclassifying the instructional resource assistant job description and increasing the remuneration. I currently earn $12.72 an hour, marginally more than a crossing guard. Yet I have responsibility for so much. This year has been exceptional, and many IRAs in the district have been pulled to supervise the cafeteria or after-school supervision on early release Wednesdays. We are team players. When COVID forced our library buildings to be closed, many of us have been taking carts of books to classrooms and giving students the opportunity to check out books as usual. However, even in a regular year, we wear many hats. Yes, we read stories and check books in and out. We also work hard to find just right books for those reluctant readers. We show students how a library is organized, how to use library electronic resources for stories and research, and we hold students accountable for lost and damaged books. We weed the shelves of outdated material, order new books using capital override or PTO funds. We work closely with grade-level teachers to supply books that complement the curriculum. We distribute textbooks, math, CKLA consumables, Chromebooks at the beginning of the year, and every time a student enrolls or changes from SOL to EDL to in-person, we make sure they have what they need. We also retrieve those items when students withdraw. We are the point person on campus for Chromebooks, swapping out Chromebooks, power cords, hotspots when they malfunction, liaising with IT to get the items picked up for repair while maintaining a small stock, fully charged, for students to borrow when they forget their own one at home. Our job description has not been updated for some time, yet the job seems to grow every year. I recognize that this year has been exceptional, but I believe that even in a regular year, we are worth more. We would be happy to provide representatives to any committee to help with any reclassification process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Steve Geislinger.
Good evening. President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, members of the board, Dr. Mensah. My name is Steve Geislinger, chaparral teacher, proud member of SEA and SEA Executive Board, speaking as an individual tonight, though. I would like to speak on item 7B, return after spring break. While I am confident in your deliberations, I thought it might be helpful to get the discussion going. We've been very successful in keeping our schools in person since we returned from virtual instruction. We have successfully avoided possible spikes of infection that would have sent us back to virtual. These successes have come from strong and consistent mitigative efforts, and no lunch is key to those. At the secondary level, students and staff are masked upon entering campus and remain masked throughout the day when in the presence of others. Students are definitively assigned seating as socially distanced as possible and are not moving about amongst their peers. This not only minimizes potential spread of infection, but also helps lead to strong contact tracing opportunities so that individual students who have interacted with infected individuals can be sent home to quarantine safely in remote instruction. The 2/3 day structure we currently have underpins and allows all of those efforts. Plan A would undercut these mitigations tragically and vastly increase the potential factor of spread, and therefore the likelihood of returning school to full virtual, among other consequences. We would have unmasked students in full communion with their peers. We would lose the certainty of on-site contact tracing, as students would not be able to be assigned and kept at specific locations. These would greatly increase the likelihood of individual infections, leading to possible outbreaks. On the other side of the coin, our current system, in which generally 2/3 of a student's classroom time is directed and monitored by the teacher, with the remaining 1/3 at student responsibility in most cases, is a model which closely mirrors and helps prepare students for college, university, and career settings where individual time management is more the norm than it normally is in school. The strong student performance in this model that we have seen, particularly in the upper secondary settings, shows that this can be and is a very effective model for students. I urge you to very carefully consider not invoking Plan A after spring break. Thank you, and of course, I'm always available for further discussion.
Thank you. Our final speaker tonight will be Karen Treon.
Good evening. Earlier today, I sent you an email requesting revisions to the middle school planning guide to reflect the reduced time for electives and the reduced offering of electives at Ingleside. I understand from Dr. Guerin that the district has now endorsed the 5-period schedule at Ingleside and credited it with an improved state letter grade. Now, I just ask that you disclose that decision clearly to parents and families by explaining the differences at Ingleside and the middle school planning guide. My family's time at Ingleside is finished. I assume that some may wonder why I have cared so much about this issue for so long. I have a lot of reasons, but tonight I'm going to mention just 3. First, no one appears to have put students first in this process. No one has looked into or reported what the effect on students is of the district limiting opportunities for middle school students to explore different elective areas before high school. No one has asked what the effect of this change has had on the social and emotional health of students. No one has asked what the effect of the abbreviated curriculum has on future interest, mastery, and leadership. No one has asked about the price paid for the state letter grade improvement. No one has answered why students at Ingleside are the only middle school students in the district who have to pay that price. Second, you cannot, in good conscience, continue to celebrate SUSD offerings in the arts if you are continuing to squeeze the arts out of our schools. There are many issues with the 5-period schedule, and I don't mean to minimize any, but I will use the arts as an example. This district brags about the arts and posts about the arts and claims to support the arts. But you have chosen one middle school where you dramatically limit the opportunity to participate in them. What does that deprive students of? How does that articulate into high school and beyond? Students at Ingleside get half the time in electives as compared to students at other middle schools. This is not an exaggeration. I have done the math. The curriculum is abbreviated and diluted. The course offerings are reduced. Fewer kids have access. The trajectories are truncated. The interpersonal connections and relationships forged between students are reduced because there is simply less opportunity. You cannot have it both ways. Is it your vision and mission to support comprehensive education, including the arts? Then great, do that. But if you aren't going to follow through on this expressed mission and vision, please stop pretending you are. Third, and most importantly, equity. You have chosen to impose this at the only Title I 6-8 middle school in SUSD. You are limiting access to the enriching classes and curriculum that are offered to students at wealthier schools. Have you asked how your decisions are impacting the students that attend this particular school? Have you assumed that students at Ingleside could simply pursue music and theater and private art classes and club sports and pick these back up in high school? Because many students at Ingleside simply don't have this option. Have you asked why this particular school is the only one so targeted and allowed to stray from district policy? Because if you haven't, how can you claim to prioritize equity? I ask that you make this clear. Make it clear in the middle school planning guide at least, so that parents can make informed decisions about where they send their students. Thank you.
Thank you. The board will now move to agenda item 7A, Student Advisory Board February presentation, Saguaro High School. Dr. Menzel.
Dr. Sackos will introduce our student president and president-elect of the Student Advisory Body. We are always appreciative to have them join us and present a report as a result of their weekly or the monthly meetings. So Dr. Sackos?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Menzel. These two don't need much of an introduction anymore, but Trex Carter, I'm mixing up their names, Caroline Carter and Trex Jones. Sorry about that. They're one to me. I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to them.
Good evening, members of the board and guests. We are so happy to be here today to give you a February update from our last meeting and other further discussion. So tonight we are going to have first our school spotlight on Saguaro High School, and then we're going to move into celebrations and improvements since last meeting and in the district as well, our current concerns, our recent partnership with the SUSD Foundation, awards and recognitions, and SAB's next steps in the future. So I'm going to hand it off to Natalie Foster and Stella Ranger from Saguaro.
Good evening, board. My apologies. Good evening, board president, Mr. Greenberg, vice president, Ms. Stanowski, governing board members, Dr. Menzel and Gladys. Today, Natalie and I will be discussing Saguaro's High School Spotlight. At Saguaro High School, we like to be known by our 4 A's, which are atmosphere, academics, arts, and athletics. For Saguaro High School's atmosphere, one can see our COVID protocols enforced to ensure students feel safe. So an example of this, one can see like in classes, if the class is small enough, or sometimes we have a lot of kids in our class, you can see how there's a seat in between us. There's hand sanitizer in every class, and there's many safety protocols like this. Another one is providing mental health resources for all students. Since our last board meeting where I discussed the numbers, we decided to pay attention on our students and make sure mental health is a priority for all of them. There's flyers all around school with mental health resources with our social worker, Miss Mindy. These opportunities are open to all students as these resources are posted online, as well for students that are in EDL or virtually. A couple examples of the atmosphere at Saguaro is seen through our school spirit. Last week, during Valentine's Day, Saguaro's student government worked on our Saguaro Valentine's heart, which is basically we cut up heart paper and write every single student's name on it. And then we spread them all around campus, and students like to just grab it, take it home, grab their friends' hearts, give it to them. It's just like a fun little thing that we do every year. And we made sure to include the in-person hearts and EDL students. And I know that EDL kids can't come to campus and grab their own hearts, so what we did is we recorded a video of all the hearts and posted it through our school announcements where EDL kids were able to see them. Also, something that is super important with school spirit is our events that we have. Right now, because of COVID, it's super hard to host events, but we still have done some that are COVID safe and social distancing. A couple examples for our senior events are our stadium painting, our senior sunrise, and we're gonna have a movie night soon. We have one event that we've made for our freshmen is Lantern Night, and at the moment, we're making more events for all of our students. Now I'm gonna hand it off to Natalie to talk about academics.
Hello. So the second A that Saguaro is known for is our academics. Now, Saguaro is in the process of becoming a STEM certified school, and we have adopted the AP Capstone program. The Capstone program allows students to develop the skills that matter most for college success, such as research, collaboration, and communication. Now, another proud accomplishment of Saguaro is the new Innovation Center that we have. The purpose of this Innovation Center is to promote and inspire innovation and creativity. It has all the materials that students need to bring their ideas to life, such as 3D printers, CNC machines, CAD stations, and other heavy machinery. Now, this space is not just for Saguaro students, as it is a district space and is open to all. And it is not just for robotics and STEM-based programs. We want our fine arts departments to utilize this program, such as theater and art, if they need to do some set building or want to pursue machined arts. Now, students can find support for their projects through the wonderful staff members and fellow students that are already utilizing this space. Now, once COVID allows, we really want to open this space up for walkthroughs for younger students as well as any community members that are interested. There has even been talk about summer camps and other events hosted at the Innovation Center to help spread creativity and innovation.
Another one of our Saguaro A's is our arts. String choir, band, dance, and string concerts will be held so parents, friends could join in and look at the arts. Our theater department this season will have their spring clue play, which will be recorded and put out to family and friends. Our theater department is also aiding Mojave with their production of Aladdin Jr. Another A is our athletics. And I can speak for most athletes because I am playing basketball currently that we are super grateful to have a season. And all the hard work that our seniors have done has finally paid off because we have multiple athletic signings. We have 2 for our baseball athletes, 9 for our football athletes, 1 for our swim athlete, and another one for track and field. And we had pictures on the slide, but I don't think it updated. But one can see from scholarships from all the way here to Ohio State to Oregon. And I'm just super proud of all the athletes because I can come in every day after school and you just see them sweating on our school football stadium. And we're just super thankful that you guys allowed us to have a season this year. Thank you so much. Oh, also, we got you guys masks from all your hard work, so I don't know how I'm supposed to give it to you, but I'll just leave them right here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So first off, we want to start with our celebrations and improvements. So recently, the SUSD Foundation has reached out to us, and we're going to have a student advisory board collaboration with them to hopefully work on some future projects to aid our students and the student advisory board. Next, the course selection for the upcoming school year went super well and very efficient. We heard very good remarks from our other student advisory board members, said it went very smoothly and they felt very confident doing so. We've also heard from other students that schools are doing better with social distancing and following COVID-19 guidelines, meaning wearing their masks better, distancing is better, and overall a better environment. Next, we have heard from our student advisory students who are attending SOL that their experience has improved with the 3-class schedule. They feel less overwhelmed, they feel like they're learning better, and they are having an overall better experience. And lastly, ever since our last meeting, all high school teachers have been more familiar with the cameras and the audio setup, and actually the audio improvement has improved in some classes, and the EDL students are able to hear better now. So thank you for that.
Hello, members of the board. We're talking about full day returns and the current concerns. The data we have right now is from Arcadia Student Government and Let's Talk. So right now what we can see is that there's a trend of people wanting to keep the 3-day schedule. This is because of COVID-19 and the rates in their community. Also the time on the computer for EDL students. Some students don't want to spend, I think it would be 6 hours and 35 minutes on the computer compared to right now where it's 4 hours and 35 minutes. So it's just too much time for them. Students right now need consistency. That's one of the problems we saw. Students have their schedules set right now. They're ready to leave at 12:20. They have other things planned and everything ready to go at 12:20. And a lot of people will have to reschedule their work for after school or their parents' schedule, and it just will be a mess for them. could have concerns about lunch and how we're going to deal with that on campus and how we're going to socially distance on campus, and that was one of the concerns. And that's what we have for now. And then we're working on a formal survey to send out to students on campus, and we have a few remarks from Caroline.
So I've reached out to some friends and other SAB board members to get some quotes from students who like the schedule right now, and they had some opinions to say about it. So this is from a student who's currently attending Desert Mountain. Throughout the entire pandemic, the district has been prioritizing social emotional learning. One of the best ways to do that is to keep a consistent schedule. By changing our routine in the fourth quarter, the district is completely disrupting not the learning schedule we have gotten used to for the past 3 quarters. Not only is this change abrupt, but it also comes at the hardest quarter of the year. There are finals, AP exams, and sports, as well as end-of-year celebrations and graduations. This change is disruptive and is only a few weeks, which does not make much sense. Finally, the CDC guidelines state that schools should only be open if masks are worn at all times and students stay 6 feet apart. With a school our size, this does not seem possible and therefore is not being safe. This is from a Chaparral student. A lot of my friends and I have jobs that start right at 12:30, so for me at least, it would mean that I have to quit my job because I would be missing 90% of work. We are also worried about lunch because we are very careful when it comes to COVID and are concerned about how it will run. Another Chaparral student. School's already extremely draining online with our current schedule, and adding another 3 hours is going to be detrimental to more kids' mental health. And lastly, from another Chaparral student. COVID-19 has significantly screwed with the mental health of myself and many others. I have taken time to make extra time for therapy and psychiatry outside of school, and the stress of going back full-time would not only mess up my schedule, but would definitely convince my parents to make me stay home. I, like many other students, cannot learn in an at-home environment, not only because I have ADHD or ADD, but also because I don't have the comfort and enthusiasm of my peers that motivates me to work. Additionally, it is incredibly unsafe to have students eat lunch in a large space where the contact tracing is impossible. There is not enough time with a 10-minute break to properly sanitize any classrooms or lunch tables for the next class. So that's just a few of students' comments, but there's a petition going around that has already over 1,000 signatures who are in favor of keeping the same schedule we have right now. And there are plenty more of these on the Let's Talk. There are tons of comments, and I bet if I asked, and I bet when we send out this formal survey, we'll get more and more comments just like this. So next is, we had a call with a woman from the SUSD Foundation, and we started brainstorming with her, and so we thought for SAB we could have some sort of retreat and a collaboration amongst all 6 high schools, some sort of leadership retreat where we all get to know each other better, learn more leadership skills, maybe like public speaking and leading a group of people better. Also, some senior recognition at graduation, may that be chords or something along the lines of that. District-wide, we want to bring up the topic of organizing award ceremonies that are not just for academic recognition. So we thought that maybe that could be for kids who are doing very well in EVIT classes, CTE classes, who excel in a certain subject like math or history or science. They get awarded for their recognition or their leadership within the community, what they do for their school, what they do for their city. It could be anything, but just outside of GPA and stats, because sometimes that creates a toxic environment amongst kids of who's better at this, who's better at what, just because they have the higher GPA. But if more students are recognized for their accomplishments already, it could move them in the future to pursue the certain career that they're already good at. And next, we had another idea of connecting high schoolers to potential internship and volunteer opportunities. So we think this could be great to aid them in going into college, or if they're not going to college, help them out, and yeah.
Awards and recognition. We wanted to focus on non-academic awards with leadership within community and showing how students through extracurricular activities have been showing leadership with clubs or other organizations on campus, just giving those awards and recognizing those leaders on campus. Also the arts and how we could recognize students that are in art programs. I've heard we had a few art awards tonight, but I was talking about more on a school level at the school, because we have the principals list, we have honors roll, but we have no awards for the students that are good with arts or with the musical instruments. And we wanted to start looking to helping those students out and giving them awards like we've seen at middle school level and continue it up to high school level. The Student Advisory Board wanted to get some recognition for the seniors' graduation night that was talked about by Caroline. Also a district-wide SUSD honor roll, which would recognize students' academic achievements and help encourage hard work. And yes, Caroline.
So in the future, we are going to continue to come back to these governing board presentations and highlighting a school each time. We are going to attend the SUSD Foundation Board meeting in March and present our ideas and opinions to them and see what happens. Next, we're going to further open the discussion of class rank at schools, as we know it's been a controversial topic for a while now. We want to open that discussion up again with a new, fresh face of students and see what their opinions are. Next, we're going to continue asking, like always, any further feedback from students to improve their education, and we present it to you. Discussing more information regarding academic achievements, like we said before. And lastly, the implementation and support of student mentor programs on each campus. So we thought at Chaparral, there's this program that used to be there where the seniors would come into PE classes once a week, and you got to talk about college stuff or what life is like, or any questions you have for further years of high school, and it was really cool. I'm not sure if they still do that or not, but I think it'd be awesome to have some sort of student mentor programs with seniors and underclassmen, as it would get them really excited about things in high school, or if they have any questions that they're confused about in the college admissions process, in just growing up in high school in general. And so, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Before you step away, are there any board member questions or comments? Well, as always, we really appreciate you doing all this work and working with our administration to bring this forward. Is there anything, since we are now kind of moving on to the second phase of this, and we've done a number of these presentations, is there anything you believe that we need to be doing to support you more, or do you feel that the level of support and the follow-up from the previous presentations has been adequate?
I feel that we're supported. I think it's really helpful when Dr. Menzel comes on our calls and asks specific questions to get some direct communication between him and the students. But I think it's great so far, and we'll let you know if we need any other help. Thank you.
Well, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The board will now move to agenda item 7B, return after spring break. Dr. Menzel.
I want to thank Caroline and Trex. I appreciate hearing from the Student Advisory Board and all of the students that participate in that body, as well as all the students that they reach out to. I think that's really important. It's the reason why we're here, and I think it's important to always center students in our conversation. So we are now at an interesting juncture in our journey in navigating COVID. As I've looked at the calendar, there are 99 days left until the last day of school, which will go by very quickly. But as you know, and you've heard already in comments this evening, the spring learning plan included a Plan A that was a full-day traditional schedule. We also did not adopt that Plan A at the beginning of the second semester, in large part because of the substantial community spread of COVID. And so we maintained the 2/3 day schedule that you've heard the students talk about and others reference. Mr. Geislinger from Chaparral in particular, talking about the mitigation strategy related to not having lunch on campus. And as you recall, that guidance was given to us by Maricopa County Department of Public Health. And so now we're looking at a few other variables that have changed that I think are relevant to discuss. And part of what I hope we accomplish this evening is to put all of the issues that need to be on the table so that we can come back on March 2nd with a formal recommendation about how to finish the fourth quarter at the secondary level. So other changes that have transpired since the time we started the second semester is one, most of our staff that wanted to get vaccinated have received the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine this past weekend, which was pretty incredible. There were a few of us sitting around the table that did experience side effects, which was proof that we got the vaccine. There were some who didn't experience side effects, and I'm really jealous. But what we know is that our staff are well on the way to having the benefit of the vaccine. And that is a positive development for Scottsdale Unified School District. Again, I want to express my appreciation to Honor Health for their partnership in making that possible. That's a change. We also, as of Monday next week, will be beginning our Mountainside Middle School pilot project. So the first traditional 6-8 middle school to go to a full-day schedule, where we have put in place mitigation strategies related to lunch. And as I emailed Principal Luke, I asked him, we need to have a feedback mechanism in order to be able to identify what's working, what's not working, what current concerns surface. We'll clearly be monitoring whether or not there's any evidence of additional spread or any spread of COVID at the campus as a result of moving to a full-day schedule. But that was part of the rationale behind having the pilot project, was to learn from that experience. There are a number of other things that we see happening in our community. So after the holidays, we saw a significant spike in COVID cases. You could look at the epi curve on the county's website, and you can see that spike pretty dramatically. We were leading the nation and the world, for the second time during the COVID pandemic. And the numbers have been dropping pretty consistently and pretty significantly. They're still at a substantial level, but for the first time since December, the COVID-like illness metric returned to yellow this past reporting period. And we haven't seen any indication that that downward trajectory is going to decline. However, as public health officials continuously remind us, that's only true if we continue to behave in ways that stop the spread of COVID, which means consistently wearing masks appropriately. It means physical distancing. It means washing our hands. It means limiting engagement with other people outside of our networks without those other mitigation strategies. And so it's a cautionary note. It's not like because we had the vaccine, everything is back to normal. But it does create some opportunities to have a conversation about what's possible for the fourth quarter. So there are a couple of things on my list, and then I want to open it up for conversation. The last thing that I didn't mention that I think is really important is that at the end of last week, the CDC issued updated recommendations for schools to safely reopen. And so I've been in conversation with Dr. Sonnenschein about what that means, particularly for our schools in Arizona and Maricopa County, and most specifically Scottsdale Unified. They are working on draft guidance from Maricopa County Department of Public Health. I've received a copy of that draft, but have not had a chance to review it in detail. What I do know in my conversations with Dr. Sonnenschein is that there is not a recommendation for us to go backwards from what we're implementing currently. Part of what has allowed us to open and stay open is our building-specific COVID metrics and measuring and carefully gauging evidence of not only COVID on our campus, but spread on our campus, because that's the biggest concern. We know that COVID exists in our community at a substantial level, and that we've had students and staff members and others who have gotten COVID, but the issue that we're working to address is to ensure we're not seeing spread within our schools. And so as long as we can continue to do those things, we don't have a recommendation from the health department to deviate from that strategy. There are going to be concerns with respect to mitigation strategies around lunch, as was said previously by Dr. Sonnenschein. 6 feet is non-negotiable when it comes to eating lunch because students are unmasked, and that just creates a serious concern. At the same time, our neighboring districts that are open and have been operating on a full-day schedule with lunch, and with a couple of exceptions, they've been able to remain open. And so I think there may be some things that we can learn there. Our operations and logistics team and Dr. Sackos, working with the principals, have been going to each of the middle school and high school sites to kind of gauge what's possible. And so if you have specific questions about that, I'm sure Dr. Sackos would be happy to talk about some of those efforts. But we've been working to identify what's possible, the pros and the cons related with a return to a full-day schedule at the start of the fourth quarter. Part of why this has a certain sense of urgency is it's really the only time we could make that shift. If we start the fourth quarter going on a full schedule, then we can finish the year with the full schedule. There are pros and cons, and we can discuss those. If we start it on the current schedule, it really doesn't make sense to shift midway through the last 45 days of the school year for reasons that the students identified. We've got final exams. We have the testing in April, the state level testing, AP testing, and then we've got the year-end activities. And so just because of the nature of the last quarter, if we don't make the change at the beginning, it may not make sense to make the change. So we want to be sure that we're vetting all of the pros and the cons, weighing the public health considerations as well as the educational considerations. And I would say that it's important for us to survey, and I know that that word used to be really bad, but I think we need to go back to our middle school and high school parents to really understand what their perspectives are. Because we have many people, and say both sides, there are people who on Let's Talk who have said, you know, it's working, the consistency is important, let's finish the year with the way that we have it, it will work better. We've had other people say that it's time. You know, our staff have been vaccinated, our students have not had a full day of learning at the middle school and high school level since last March. And so we do have opinions that have been expressed on both sides, but what we don't know is what do the majority of our parents think, and is there actually a majority opinion? We have many who will say they speak for the silent majority, but I don't know that we really have the data. So from my perspective, one recommendation tonight would be that we actually conduct that survey. Caroline referenced the student petition that's circulated, and I've had a number of Let's Talk submissions from students. And one of the things that they talk about that I think is relevant is the fact that our Surface Pro equipment barely makes it through the 3 periods that we cover now. So the logistical challenge of charging all of the laptop computers that we've come to rely on creates an impediment to having a full day schedule. Not insurmountable, but it's a legitimate issue that's one of many that we have to address. I think we also need to ask the question, what do we gain by making a change at this juncture, and what do we lose? In speaking with the counselors last week, they pointed out a very disturbing trend related to our 6th grade students at the middle school. That is, we see 2 to 3 times as many students failing their classes, 2 or more, 3 or more classes than we see in a typical year. I can't answer the question of whether or not a full day is the solution to that problem, but it absolutely is a critical issue that we need to address. And so I think we need to put all of those things on the table to have our conversation. I've had some people ask, why are we having this discussion? Just make the decision to implement a full day because the teachers are vaccinated. I've had other people say, why are we having the conversation? We still have substantial community spread, and what we're doing seems to be working. I think you could make arguments both ways, and part of our job as a governing board and a leadership team is to carefully weigh all of those factors in making a determination for how we finish the school year. From my personal perspective, I think that Scottsdale Unified School District has carefully navigated this in a way that's prioritized the needs of our students and supported safety for our staff. I hope that we can finish the year strong, and I'm anxious to hearing what your thoughts, opinions, and most importantly, the critical criteria are that you're looking for as we bring forward a recommendation on March 2nd for consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Before we move to board member questions and comments, just to clarify, the specific point of tonight's discussion is for each board member to, or for us to have a discussion that you can take those points into consideration for that recommendation.
That is correct.
Are there any board member comments or questions? Board member Hartwells.
Thank you. I do think it's important to have the discussion because as we've learned, there's dynamic decision-making in a situation like this, so we have to be open to the changes and navigating those in an informed way. So I appreciate having the discussion. One point I'd like to clarify, and I have heard Dr. Fauci make this clarification, and that is that the vaccine's clinical endpoint is not full immunization from being infected, but rather amelioration of critical illness. So when we talk about being vaccinated against COVID-19 in this context, based on the data that is available now, that does not mean what it means when you talk about being vaccinated for, say, measles, mumps, and rubella. So a couple of questions, and just more to lattice to some of your comments, Dr. Menzel. You made reference to the uptick in cases, positivity. after the holidays, which most certainly did occur, and we're about to move on to spring break, what are people's thoughts? My reaction is if history is to help inform what may happen after spring break, is that we may see an uptick in the community yet again, because people, and it's their choice to travel. So I put that on the table because I consider that relevant. Another point I'd like to bring up and revisit, which I brought up when we talked about the building-specific metrics in the first place, and that was efforts to improve the integrity of our data. And like you had mentioned, you had some preliminary discussions about screening testing, something that wasn't as burdensome as individual testing. And I was curious what the status of those conversations are, as they are directly relevant to the CDC's reissued guidance on February 12th. And then the final point I'll make, and then I will turn it over to my colleagues, equally salient in the revisited CDC updated guidance is the necessity for physical distancing, which I think we can at least agree is not something that's happening with any kind of regularity, and understood why. It's not that anyone's doing anything wrong. It's just we have some buildings are more suitable to physical distancing than others. Some class sizes are more suitable to physical distancing than others. So it would seem that in order to meet the CDC guidelines, unless we're just not going to meet them, and if we're not, we need to be open and honest about that, that those two, surveillance testing and physical distancing, need to be tackled in a more refined way than we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hartwells. Were you looking to answers to any of your questions just now or points, or were you just wanting to raise those for the committee?
I'll raise those as discussion points and things that have gone through my head as I went through the CDC revised guidance as of February 12th.
Thank you. Dr. Menzel, do you want to respond to anything at this point, or would you prefer that the other board members weigh in first?
I think if everybody can weigh in, then we'll see if we
Perfect.
can capture it all.
Are there any other board member questions or comments? Vice President Sanowski?
Yes, I would like to make it very clear that my concerns are the social distancing and the cohorting of students. I do believe by extending the day to include lunch, being on campuses, I'd like to hear what Dr. Sackos has to say after going through the middle school and high school campuses. My perspective has been that at most of the middle schools and high schools, it's just not feasible to socially distance properly. And then I feel like then we may as well just throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to tracking contacts for our students and our staff, because the cohorts then become really muddy. And I think then our data, I don't find that there being much use to collecting our data if that is something that we're going to give up on. And I think that's a very important factor, and everything that I have seen, heard, and read discusses the importance of 6 feet social distancing. We understand that, going in the classrooms, there's not 6 feet between kids. But at least there's a group that is with one another all day, so that if someone is sick, there is an easier chance to follow and trace the sickness. So that is something that is my major concern, is the 6 feet. The lack of 6 feet without a mask on makes it even worse. I've seen setups on the campuses, or at least some of them, and I know principals are trying really hard. I do not like that this is falling on principals. I also, think that us as a governing board, that we should be the ones making these decisions. I know our whole idea with the vet was to allow, or at least my perspective was, that it allowed for some local control, local governance, and oversight. It was never intended to kick the can down the road. That may be viewed as that, but that was not ever my intent with that. It was to let locals be able to look at their data and determine whether if it was a classroom or throughout the campus. So more closer examination. My concerns, again, the social distancing and the dining without the masks on, and then what that really does to our ability to trace and track data.
Thank you. Are there any other board member Beckman?
Question first, when was the last parental survey done? Do you remember?
The survey would have been in the fall. We did a commitment form in November. It wasn't really a survey for the second semester choice. It would have been late summer, early fall would have been a survey.
So that was the commitment form / survey where we had the chart up there, the pie chart that showed 70-80% of our parents wanted to return in person. That's the one?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, I just was curious. The next question / comment that I have is, I know that lunch seems to be the concern. We have some neighboring districts that have been full return for quite some time. In fact, that have some high schools that are double the size of our high schools. So I'd like a very specific conversation about how they're making this work. Because we keep talking around social distancing and not being possible and whatnot, but somehow they are making it work. So I'd like us to spend some time speaking with them. I know you've talked to them. Chandler, Mesa, Paradise Valley is opening to a full return next week after being virtual for this long. I'd like to hear how they're planning on doing this. And did the CDC guidelines touch on employees being at all vaccinated? Did
Yes.
it come into it at all?
Yes.
Other than you saying that it's not necessarily like the vaccine that we see with MMR or something like that?
May I comment?
Of course.
The CDC guidelines have the vaccine and testing, surveillance testing, school-based surveillance testing as a next level, like a secondary level of mitigation strategy, where the first level are 5-pronged, of which the physical distancing at least 6 feet is the second prong, followed by the mask wearing. So yes, it's touched on as a second layer, not a first layer.
But they're not giving guidance as in you have a school district where all of your employees have received the second dose of vaccine. If that is the case, here is our guidance.
That is true. That is not the case. They do have if-then, if there is surveillance testing, but not an if-then in terms of vaccine. And my educated guess would be because of the availability of the vaccine.
Right.
It's
Okay.
not consistent yet.
Thank you for that. And, having high school students myself, I think I wanted to touch on a few things. I think, there are many differing opinions out there, and some people in this room, et cetera, probably have very different ones than myself, people that I respect and that I value a lot. But we all understand our schools are following various risk mitigation protocols. We recently established these individual school COVID spread triggers. All of our staff has either received the second dose of the COVID vaccine or has been offered it. We have invested heavily in classroom cameras. Parents currently have a choice of in-person learning for 2/3 a day, EDL or SOL. I was pretty overcome recently when I was informed, along with the rest of the governing board, that the suicide attempt rate in our district has risen. I think we need to say that, as distasteful as it is. Many of our students are feeling lost, disconnected, and are concerned about their future. It is my belief that we need to continue consulting with the health department, follow our risk mitigation protocols, and begin the fourth quarter with our students returning to a full day of classes. I think it's been a year and it's time.
Can I just comment on that?
Board Member
Since
Hartwell.
This is a discussion. Part of, not a part of, but a fundamental to the CDC's guidance for the entire year has been dynamic decision-making. And I realize people have fatigue from all of this, So do I. I have 2 high school students too, and they're both handling this pretty differently. And I also realize that at the end of the day, whatever containment decisions we make, they only matter if people will comply with them outside of the schools. So that still is true. So I don't want an arbitrary March X, we're done dealing with this, because we can't be.
Board Member Lindsay, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to hear if Dr. Sonnenschein has addressed the 6 feet. I'd like to hear the lunch strategies that are being discussed and weighed. And then the mental health aspect. I just can't stop thinking of the kids that are dealing with the mental health issues and struggling, touring these schools and hearing about the students that have just fallen off the grid. I can't stop thinking about where those kids are and what's going on with them. So those are the things weighing on me with the risk of full return and, the equity issues. I just think at some point our kids are going to need to be back in school. So I would like to really look at the mental health aspect because I know there hasn't been a big enough spotlight on that. So.
Thank you. Are there any other board member questions or comments? I appreciate each of these matters, and I've had to think this over pretty hard. Because I don't have the Maricopa County Department of Public Health's recommendations, it's very difficult for me to provide a direct statement. When we originally began dealing with this topic in March of 2020, the CDC's guidance, and I keep pointing this out, was not too different than it is even today. It was more rudimentary looking. It was a piece of paper as opposed to a full, nice and beautiful presentation. But it was pretty much the same thing. If there's widespread community spread, you should be in virtual for 8 or more weeks when it comes to an airborne virus of this nature. And the concerns that they raised, if you were going to close, were the same, that students and parents and other community members are going to congregate outside of the classrooms, and there's no control over contact tracing. There's social emotional issues, which was noted in theirs, again, back in March 2020. There were concerns about the ability for equity and socioeconomic reasons, being able to find caretakers, especially given that a lot of caretakers in the United States are grandparents, the very group of individuals with whom we are not supposed to be commingling with, especially if you have children who are out and about. So the same concerns and issues have existed since March 2020. I do not know, and perhaps Board Member Beckman knows, why we originally closed before the governor closed us. I don't know why that decision was made. The Maricopa County Department of Public Health and the Arizona Department of Public Health made the decision for us not to close. The CDC guidance that was available at the time did not recommend that we simply close our schools either. We did close for the 2-week period, and then the governor closed us. So at that point, the board had never had a discussion about whose guidance we are supposed to follow and who we are sticking to. When the governor came out with the executive order stating that the state and local health departments are to prepare these metrics as guidelines that we are required to consider, though we don't have to follow it, but we're required to consider, we should follow those. And so from, I believe, about August, that is what the board had chosen. We don't have to keep doing this, but the board took the decision, I feel, and again, Board Member Beckman might have a different view, that we said that we would follow our local health authority, follow the metrics, whether and as those might be amended, and they have been amended. I'm a little concerned because about changing that track and moving back to the CDC. At the time that we were choosing to follow the county health department, there were a lot of people who wanted our schools to remain in virtual who specifically asked us not to follow the CDC because the CDC was seen to be taking a laissez-faire approach. Then when the county health department removed its metrics or went back on them, we were told, again, we shouldn't follow them either now that they're not following these metrics, and we should do something else. And so only now that the CDC has changed its view, and there are many different reasons, I'm sure, as to why. And again, it's a dynamic situation, so the advice will change over time. That's how this works. Now it's, well, stop following the state health department. Let's go and start following the CDC. And I'm worried that, if we did that right now, we would have to close all of our schools because we have more than 100 cases per 100,000. The metrics are virtually identical to what the state health department originally created in August with the 3 metrics: COVID-like illness, which the CDC has used despite the fact that we do not really track COVID-like illness. So the metrics are virtually the same as the metrics we had in August. The difference is that there's the hard 6-foot rule, which I appreciate and I agree scientifically that is accurate. And if you could do more, that's even better. But if American schools do that, I'm not sure that there are any, at least as far as I'm aware, there probably aren't many public schools, probably aren't many charter schools, and from my history in private schools, I don't think there are many private schools either that could meet that requirement. And certainly all of our schools, PV, Mesa, SUSD, would all have to close if we followed the CDC directly. So my personal view would be I really want to see what the county health department says and to follow their guidance and advice. It is tailored to us. It isn't necessarily that I agree with the advice that they give us or that I do agree with the advice that they give us. It's just that they're the ones who have been working with us on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones who have been providing our guidance, and I think relatively successfully. I don't think we can really say we've had massive issues. So for me, my personal view is the county health department and the state health department are controlling on this issue for our local issues. In my mind, I think the board's decided that. We can change that, and that's open to the board. I don't have an issue bringing that back up, on March 2nd for discussion and a vote. But I think that's the best way of doing it. And if the rule is, the 6 feet, we agree with the CDC, and we're going to follow it, the 6 feet, not just for lunch, but for all matters, then I think that's what we have to do, one way or the other. If they come back and say, you have all these mitigation efforts, they seem to be working, let's maintain this kind of local control, let's see what happens at each site, then my personal view is that we would continue that. And I do think matters like the Desert Mountain trial are important because it could really succeed well. As Board Member Beckman has said, there are other schools, and as Dr. Menzel said, that have been doing this for months now. And I think successfully. I've not really been paying attention to those other districts. I've been mostly paying attention to our own. On the survey point, I don't think there's personally a need for a survey. I know every time we do a survey, the first survey we did showed a very significant 50-50 split. And then even though it showed that, both sides argued against it and said that, they're representative, we're representative. Then they pointed to the selection process. But as we all know, the selection process in November, there are parents who chose in-person learning on the understanding that we would not radically, just out of the blue, move to full days learning. And I just think a survey on this point is going to confuse people. I'm worried about that. And I think at the end of the day, our community is divided on this issue, whether our community wants to accept that or not. I think that's just the reality. I wish we were unified, but it's okay. We have a difference of opinion on this. That's just the situation. We are really trying to do our best. A couple more points, and I'll open that. Spring break, I think, is a very important question. We have seen a spike. I think it's very valuable. Board Member Hartwell's and Vice President Sanowski, I think that's been a concern of mine. That's really kind of come to the forefront of my mind here is that we always have that spike. We always say we're going to open up, right after that holiday. And then we always have a flood of parent and student complaints and teacher complaints and staff complaints that are well-founded. I don't mean to say complain in a pejorative way. I mean they are well-founded. That we have widespread community spread. We know everything's spiking. We know people aren't following the rules because they've not followed the rules for all the other breaks. And we want you to delay. And then we call an emergency meeting, and then we delay, by a few days. So I think a strong recommendation on that point that we can stick to that makes sense, either bringing back everyone, in the same model for the first week to give it that week, and then, phase back into the full day, whatever the recommendation is to do that. But certainly at the middle and high school levels, we're going to receive the exact same concerns. They're going to have the same exact documentation, parties, videos, everything on social media. It's going to come to us. So I think that will be the same. For student mental health, yeah, obviously, in the United States, unfortunately, adolescent suicide has been on the rise for decades now. We do not properly fund mental health services at our schools or generally in our state or across our nation. That's something that's really important to keep in mind, that this is not a new issue. It's a very serious issue. It's one that we need to care about. I don't know if returning to full days of in-person learning is going to radically change that, because it's been trending upwards all these years without much public concern until now. And I have to say, not that any single board member, I want to be very clear, the board members here have not been using this as a political pawn, so that is not my comment, but pundits have been, and I think that's very disappointing. Board Member Hartwells.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to point out a couple of things that are in the CDC guidelines as of February 12th, and this statement is relevant, I think, is that all mitigation strategies provide some level of protection. So it's not discounting that the things that we have been doing don't have some effectivity, right, effectiveness, but the layered strategies implemented concurrently provide the greatest level of protection. Okay, so that was when I was referring to these two layers. So they have a first layer, insulating layer, and then a second kind of surrounding layer. And then the other thing I wanted to point out that's in here, which of course now I can't find, but it was with respect to the social and emotional health comment that Board Member Lindsay pointed out that we learned some disturbing information on, but that there was an emphasis in the guidance, and I don't know what page, but I can find it for you, but I wrote it down specifically, to conduct a recommendation that schools conduct active and specific outreach to their underserved families. And my question that I wrote for myself is, are we doing this? And I realize everyone is spread really thin right now, and so to task, on top of that. However, in light of the real consequences of what we've lived through on our students and staff, I guess the question is, have we made an effort to kind of put that infrastructure in place to make targeted contacts with some of our underserved families?
Can
Board Member Beckman.
I do want to speak to that just a minute and actually take a minute to commend our principals. I've spoken to two, and I assume all of them are doing this, that are actually physically doing home visits for some of these students to check on them and make sure, see how it is. I mean, they've reported back that some of what they have found has been quite alarming, but that they are actually going and driving out with their leadership team in certain cases to make sure these kids are taken care of and still okay. And so I want to thank them for that and acknowledge that they are trying to take care of this very real issue.
Board Member Lindsay.
Something along those lines, from our school tours, the addresses that the kids provide, a lot of times they're not valid addresses anymore, and the phone numbers. We were running into that hearing from the principals, that, they've gone out with the resource officers and tried to find these kids, and the addresses aren't valid addresses, and the phone numbers don't work anymore. So it's really hard to find some of these kids.
Are there any further questions or comments before I hand it over to Dr. Menzel? Dr. Menzel.
Well, I want to thank you all for sharing the things that are really important for us to address in the next 2 weeks before we come back. There are a couple of preliminary comments that I can make, and I want to build first on what Dr. Hartwell's mentioned, and that is the layered mitigation strategies. That is really critical. If you read the CDC recommendations in broad form, they're what we're doing. Where people trip up is what's a rigid applying of the 6 foot of separation that there's no wiggle room. And I think that's the thing that you'll see the health department address in the preliminary draft that I have here. It indicates that schools who have successfully implemented mitigation strategies with hybrid learning scenarios without evidence of sustained COVID-19 spread can continue to operate using their current strategies as long as this includes wearing masks at all times, maintaining physical distancing of 6 feet or more to the greatest extent possible. So the difference between the CDC guidelines and the draft from the county is to the greatest extent possible. There's a recognition that there's a limit to what's possible, and if we're not seeing spread on our campuses, then why would we need to go backwards in terms of what we're doing in serving our students? And then it continues, and careful surveillance for COVID-19 cases and outbreaks on a school-by-school level, which is the other piece that has been really important for us. It's not an all-or-nothing proposition. What's happening in Anasazi might be very different than what's happening in Tonalea, and to say that it's going to be all or nothing, we concluded a long time ago would be problematic. So I think layered mitigation, making sure that we're carefully attending to what's happening in each building as we put in place with the vet teams, the review of the data, and all the rest is important. Spring break, critical. And a lot of people have raised that as an issue. Don't have a recommendation yet, but I will acknowledge that as we've seen with fall break when we came back, that put Chaparral very close to, in fact, had we had our building-specific metrics in place then, Chaparral would have gone virtual for 2 weeks. So that, I think, is one that we should spend some more time teasing out in terms of what it should look like. We have been gathering information on surveillance. I will say that one of the things that surfaces, we found some organizations that are willing to actually come and do testing on site. But then we have people saying, are we bringing COVID to our campus? Because they don't just limit the testing to school students. And so anybody in the neighborhood can come by and get tested. Well, if they're symptomatic, are you actually bringing, something that could be problematic on the campus? And that's been one of the challenges. But we haven't stopped the investigation of what's possible on surveillance. We will have a more specific, with pictures, a breakdown of potential mitigation strategies. Will include what we learned from our neighboring districts in terms of their mitigation strategies for lunch, if they have them. In some cases, we've heard that they don't. And so if you're not working to implement mitigation strategies, that's important information to share, and we'll share that as we confirm that information. I think absolutely the social-emotional learning and the impact on our students of the pandemic is an important and relevant situation. And my belief is that because we've been able to remain open since September, mid-September for our elementary students and mid-October for most of our high school students, that we've been able to address many of those concerns. The crisis would be much greater if we had not been able to offer in person. At the same time, the CDC guidance and the Maricopa County Department of Public Health draft require that we provide virtual learning opportunities for students who have significant health issues or need that option. We've also provided that, intend to continue providing that, so that we're positioning the district to be able to meet the needs of all of our students as best we can, recognizing that none of these options are necessarily optimal. They're how can we best survive the pandemic until we get to the other side. So this is really what I was hoping for in tonight's conversation to surface. I've got between 10 and 15 specific areas of focus that will help our team prepare responses to these issues and questions and come back with more definitive information before we ask the governing board to make a recommendation for the fourth quarter.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Board Member Hartwells?
Yes, I just wanted to just put on the table and make sure in the list is to re-elevate the student's voice on continuity.
Thank you. Yes.
Are there any final board member comments or questions? Well, thank you very much for the excellent discussion. I think it provides a very good foundation for our March 2nd meeting. The board will now move to agenda item 7C, Kairos Health Arizona Annual Report for the Benefit Insurance Plans. Dr. Menzel.
I would actually like to ask Shannon Crozier to introduce our friends from Kairos to walk us through our current benefit situation.
Yes, good evening, Board President Greenberg, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and guests. Tonight we have with us Tanya Edwards and John Ashton, who are with Kairos, a medical group, to provide just a background of what's happened the last year, where things are looking when it comes to our medical insurance account and how things are being spent through that program.
All right. Good evening, members of the governing board, Dr. Menzel. Nice to see everybody. My name is Tanya Edwards. I'm the Associate Executive Director for Kairos Health Arizona, an employee benefit pool here in the state of Arizona serving public entities. I want to thank you for your time. I recognize it's valuable, and you guys have pretty significant issues that you're dealing with. So I will try to be respectful of that and provide as much detail as I can, but please feel free to ask questions. I'm going to quickly do just a brief performance review so that you can see how financially the plan has performed, as well as what are the major cost drivers. I'll then talk a little bit about some of the accomplishments to date, as well as what led us to the decision to move from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona to United. And then also some ongoing strategies to cost contain, as well as provide best value and benefits for employees. Okay, so here is a quick illustration of the financial performance to date from 2017 through current. As a quick reminder for the board, I think some of you are aware of this, but essentially when you join Kairos, you can join with two different options. One is a shared risk program, which is more of a guaranteed cost, where you participate with other entities that share in the risk. And then the other option is on a self-funded basis. And Scottsdale is participating on that self-funded basis, where essentially you are responsible for your own risk within the program, but you have flexibility in plan designs, renewal rates, et cetera. And then you also reap the benefits of joint purchasing, as well as the administrative components that come along with the pool. As you can see, as evidenced in this financial performance, in 2017, we saw about a break-even year. In 2018 and 2019 through June 30th, 20, you guys actually saw a surplus over contributions versus expenses. And then current to date, year to date through December of 2020, you can see there that we're performing just a little better than break-even. So all in all, things have been pretty successful from a financial performance, and we do provide those monthly financials to the administration. I want to spend a little bit of time talking through some of the major drivers, and we could probably provide more data than you'd ever want to look at as it relates to health insurance and cost drivers, but I chose to focus on the few that we're seeing in the data. The first is outpatient spend. Outpatient is defined as basically anything that happens outside of the hospital on an inpatient basis. So typically people who are admitted for more than 23 hours are considered inpatient. Everything else falls as outpatient, whether in a hospital setting, a surgical center, labs, and those types of things. One of the areas that we did see a pretty significant uptick in spend is in this particular area. And I'll highlight for you specifically as we drill further into the data where we saw the most significant increases in just injectable medications. Basically, those are medications that have to be administered in a medical setting by a medical professional. And so you can see there the statistics. There's always kind of two things that drive cost changes in your benefit plan. One is utilization, and then second is actual cost of services. So you can see there in the injectable medication category specifically, we did see an uptick in the number of claimants that are receiving those services, in addition to the cost of those services. And this is an area of focus, I would say, for most of the plans and the employers that we work with. I do think I would mention, because this is a significant driver, it's also an area of opportunity. So with education and some advocacy, which I'll speak to a little bit further in the presentation, we think there's opportunity to help cost contain and manage that spend in that particular category. The second major driver comes by way of pharmacy spend. And I'm going to break it into two different categories. One is in the traditional prescription spend, and that's basically when you go to the pharmacy, you hand your card, you pick up your prescription, you take it home with you. Specifically for Scottsdale, you can see there diabetes actually accounts for about 32% of our traditional pharmacy spend. That's pretty relevant and consistent with what we see in the industry because, as we know, diabetes is increasing in prevalence, and it's a pretty devastating illness. Not always a bad thing, though, too, because controlled diabetics with medication and other services actually reduce medical spend overall. So not necessarily a one-to-one, but definitely a driver in terms of spend. You can see there the average cost of a prescription for a diabetic is about $542. And then if we look at your top 20 drugs, 10 of those actually are for diabetes. The next line there about generic drug average cost versus brand average, that's not specific to diabetes, that's just in the traditional spend area. But you can see highlighted the difference of how much more costly brand prescriptions can be and what members are contributing to that cost. This is another area of opportunity where I'd say we could focus on some education and some advocacy to help people understand the differences that exist with the various options that they're presented. And I'll mention really quickly in this area, we're actually in the process of working with our clinical advocate as well as our pharmacy benefit manager to implement a pilot program. And that pilot program would basically look at this traditional spend, particularly in the diabetes and some other chronic condition areas, that would look for gaps in care, so people not taking the medications or receiving the services that they need, as well as some drug duplication and then opportunities to look at generic versus brand. The second classification of pharmacy spend, and this is a hot topic in the news, is specialty medications. Specialty medications are defined as high cost, high complexity, and or high touch. They need a certain administration. But these are ones that you can actually get outside of the medical setting and be provided directly to participants. Alarming statistic, I think it was a couple years ago, they were projecting that the specialty spend would get up to about 50% of our total pharmacy spend, and that's exactly what we're seeing. So this last year, about $2.1 million of our $4.3 million in pharmacy spend, it was attributable to specialty medications. You can also see there the average cost increased by about 26%. I think the takeaway here is we are treating more diseases, but they are coming at a cost, and it's definitely an issue that the industry is grappling with. I'll mention really quickly, some of these are life-saving treatments. So you might recall several years back when specialty really kind of came to market, it was for, one of the first treatments was for hepatitis C. Hepatitis C treatment was going to be about 3 doses. I think it cost about $210,000. But what that did is that saved that individual and basically cured hepatitis, and that prevented basically a liver transplant. So again, there's a lot of life-saving treatments, but they definitely do come at a cost. This is also another area of opportunity. So one of the things, the strategies that we deployed on this is to work with our pharmacy benefit manager. A lot of the drug manufacturers for these specific medications actually provide funding to help support the cost of it. And so what we've done is we've had them go out and find those resources to basically reduce the spend, not only for the plan, but also from a participant perspective. We've seen about $100,000 in savings for the first 6 months that we've had this program in place. I'll jump ahead here to the third major cost driver is in the area of chronic conditions. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but I think the major takeaway is what we're seeing in chronic conditions, which is high cholesterol, blood pressure, depression, things like that. Prevalence is increasing, and basically our populations aren't getting any healthier. And so again, another opportunity, we can't only manage cost, but we also have to help manage the health of the population and some strategies around that. You can see a quick illustration here on chronic conditions based upon the data. Specifically, somebody that doesn't have a chronic condition is only going to be spending about $115 per member per month. If you add to that the chronic condition, so 5 or more, that individual is actually going to be costing about $2,200 per month. So a very, very drastic difference, just kind of speaking to the importance of really managing the total population. This I included for you is just a brief plan summary. As a reminder, you do offer a PPO plan and 3 high deductible plans. We're not anticipating any specific changes to those plans. With the new plan year coming up in July, you have about 28% that are enrolled in the PPO and another 72% that are enrolled in the high deductible plans. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second. Do you guys want to ask any questions, or shall I?
Absent board member objection, I think if you finish
Okay,
the presentation, then we can move to board member questions and comments.
sure. Thank you. Okay, so this next slide just illustrates for you some of the accomplishments or things that we've been able to achieve over the course of the last few years. Specifically in that first grouping of items that I've included, we were able to recover about $800,000 back to Scottsdale Unified School District, specifically in the area of recovered rebates that traditionally would be kept by the insurance carriers. We did identify an overbilling issue where our claims administrator had billed us twice for a number of claims. And then we've recovered from some audits and things like that in the way of medical as well as pharmacy. We, in July, actually implemented a data warehouse and reporting analytics tool where we actually get all of the data into a central source where we can actually mine the data and look into these drivers, which really help us define what the strategy is moving forward. That was important to us because we had difficulty doing that in the environment that we live in today. And so having that direct access to data really helps us identify more cost-effective treatments, quality providers, and things of that nature. We also in July added a clinical resource to our team to deploy our clinical, what we're calling our clinical advocacy program. And the focus there is to really look at quality treatment, again, improving the health of the population, cost containment strategies, and then also really just to serve as the advocate for that person. People recognize healthcare is complicated. We don't know where to go. We get a diagnosis. There's a bunch of different references and referrals that we are driven to, and it can be extremely overwhelming. So really just that advocacy piece to help them navigate that. I'll share with you 2 quick stories, if you don't mind, because I think this is the program that we're most excited about, where we really see we can make an impact. One specifically in Scottsdale was an individual that was working to get medications to treat a condition of Parkinson's, and basically was running up against a bunch of red tape in order to get that prescription. We had the clinical advocate that was able to work with the various parties and basically got the medication and prevented her from having a flare-up, which would have ended up in the hospital. And that individual said, you know what, thanks so much for going the extra mile. You helped solve the problem. I never would have figured this out on my own. The second one that I'll share with you has to do with those injectable medications that we talked about earlier. So this is a really big focus and, again, area of opportunity for us here, because now we can see who's getting those medications and really start to target and help them understand their options. So this one particular example, we had an individual that was receiving services at a really renowned provider here in the area. And basically the medication was costing, I think it was like 3 times, but by moving that individual outside of that outpatient hospital setting into an infusion center or even in home health, you can have those services done in home health and it's a little bit more convenient for the individual. We were able to save just for that one patient about $135,000 per year. So in my mind, that's just the very tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot of opportunity that exists, especially as we see those dollars and spent. I touched briefly on the RX strategies, and then I'll go ahead and just touch briefly on the partner assessment. As we entered this 2020 year, we were in about our 4th year of partnership with Blue Cross and other partners. And so we thought it was time to do some due diligence, particularly based upon some of our experience, to really just evaluate our options. We took that very seriously, and it was a pretty valiant effort to go to market and basically assess what the market looks like. We put together an RFI, which was comprised of about 130 different requirements that we wanted out of a network partner and a claims administrator. We sent that to market. We sent to about 16 different firms, a variety of different firms, both insurance carrier models, what we call bundled or unbundled models with third-party administrators or separate medical management firms. We took all of the responses back, compiled those, and then we basically narrowed it down to 4, including Blue Cross Blue Shield as the incumbent carrier. Once we did the analysis and then the proposals, as well as the actual, what I'll call finalist presentations and just presentations on their service and offerings, we narrowed it down to really, obviously, 2. One being Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona, which we had the existing partnership with, and then United Healthcare with UMR as the third-party administrator. With specifically UHC and UMR, they agreed to all but 7 of those 130 requirements. Blue Cross, on the flip side, actually disagreed to about 38 of them. And so that was a big sign to us about just the ability to be flexible and to tailor the programs to what we see that our partners need. And so that launches into the decision that our board made back in November. So we did make a decision to move to, again, United Healthcare's network. UMR is the third-party administrator, so they'll be doing the claims as well as the medical management programs. Some of the things that resonated with us as we were making that decision was mission alignment. We want to do things different in the healthcare industry because the way that the carriers, in the traditional sense, it's not working. So we want to do things differently. So they're very mission aligned. Best-in-class service, we have expanded service to 24/7 now. That's not something that we have today, so we thought that was a valuable thing for plan participants. Focus on quality of care, as I talked about, and the health improvement initiatives. So some strong programs that will really promote those things. Cost containment strategies. So again, going back to the injectable example. And then we did do an analysis on the network specifically, and that was basically a 99% crossover. So the providers that are being used today by our populations, 99% of them are also contracted with United UMR. I'll mention 2 other quick things. They do have enhanced telehealth services. Obviously, with the pandemic, that has become a huge focus, and there's no cost share associated with those services. And then finally, we have the opportunity to remain with Health Equity for Health Savings Account. That is always a really, really hot topic when you're exploring other alternatives, is moving people's HSA money. As I mentioned, I think we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg as it relates to some of the strategies that were and the savings in the area of clinical care advocacy. Again, with the focus on improving quality, health, we have the data that we can start to support that and really just providing an advocate to your employees. We're also looking to increase biometric screenings. We have seen some slippage in preventive care services, particularly with the pandemic, so people not getting the services that they need, both from a wellness perspective as well as a chronic condition perspective. So really starting to identify areas there that we can help educate members. Again, I mentioned telehealth at no cost share, and then really a focus on continued employee benefit education. So as we go into things like open enrollment, how can we make people more aware of the choices and the resources that they have? With that, I will entertain any questions.
Thank you. Are there any board member questions or comments? Board member Beckman?
I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you because the reason I don't have any questions is I took some time earlier, about a month ago, and met via Zoom with the 2 of you, and you answered a lot of questions I had before this took place. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking the time to do that. Board member Hartwells.
Thank you. I had just a quick question on the overbilling and the RX rebates, the numbers that you showed.
Yes.
Were those net numbers to whom?
To Scottsdale specifically.
And those were net
Yes.
after your fees? Okay. All right.
Yes.
And then one just clarification, because I don't know what loss ratio meant on one of your slides. What's the ratio of
Yeah,
what
so
to what?
that's, loss ratio demonstrates for you, basically, if you're collecting, let's say, $100 in contributions towards your medical plan, you're collecting 100, or are you paying 100 out? So anything below 100 demonstrates better performance. Anything over 100 is not as good.
Okay.
So you're not collecting enough to cover your expenses, essentially.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thanks.
No problem.
That's it. Thanks.
Vice President Sinowski.
quick question. How does this data for Scottsdale School compare to other school districts?
Very good question. We have another entity that participates on a self-funded basis as well, and I don't think they would have a problem with me sharing it, but Chandler Unified School District. And I can say a lot of the patterns that we're seeing, as I talked about with the injectables, pharmacy spend, and those things are very similar in nature. So really our focus is to target kind of the bigger, I don't want to call it the low-hanging fruit, right, because it's not low-hanging fruit, but the bigger opportunities to really be more cost-effective as well as improve patients' experience.
And I'd like to just add that I really appreciate you focusing on education of the users of the plan, because I think that could ultimately change some of these practices and conditions.
We agree with that. Participants definitely want more information. It's just very difficult to navigate, and there's not enough information out there. So I appreciate your comments.
Yeah, thank you.
Board Member Lindsay, do you have any questions or comments?
Is Chandler the only other district that is self-funded in the trust?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And just basically flexibility is the main driver on that?
Flexibility, yeah. Tolerance for risk, I would say, as well. The other 64 entities are part of that shared risk pool that I mentioned.
And then with the educating on the various plans, is there more of an emphasis to educate on certain plans in an attempt to maybe steer employees into a plan that would maybe be cost savings?
One of the things that we actually did is we created a plan comparison tool to help support that. I think Scottsdale's a little unique just given the enrollment process that you work through, but we do have tools like that. And one of the things that we're also looking is how do we start to create more incentives and strategies for people to understand what their choices are. You're a little bit limited in the context of high deductible plans. So I think our next phase is, all right, how do we start to shift some of that? Because you're always going to have the individuals that will gravitate towards the high deductibles with the health savings if they don't have a lot of expenses and things like that. And then the users really need a little bit more clarity around who is the appropriate provider, how much cost difference is it to go to a hospital and have a surgery versus a standalone surgical center. So we're looking at some of those things to really help create some distinction from a plan design perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If I'm not mistaken, we added the HDHP 5000 plan 2 years ago? A year
Yes,
ago?
we're coming up on 2 years, that's correct.
But it seems like the PPO and the other high deductible 1500 is still where the majority of, is the leaky part of our plan system. So to Board Member Lindsay's point, I think more education on that and shifting employees over to the other high deductible plans would be the more sensible decision, would it not?
Repeat that last part, I apologize.
Well, the plan was added, it wasn't added, the board did not approve it because it went through the trust. And it was a plan that was added upon recommendation. I'm really not sure how it got added, but I'm still not sure why it got added, because it seems like the other high deductible healthcare plan, the 2800, is performing at the same rate as the high deductible 5000 plan. So the issue seems to be that our biggest expenses continue to be in our PPO plans and our high deductible healthcare plans. So to Board Member Lindsay's point, educating our staff on those areas, would it not make more sense to try and move or explain to staff that they shouldn't be in the PPO plans, but should be in the other high deductible plans?
Yes, I would agree with you. The one caveat I would say is I think people have different levels of tolerance for risk too, right? So for some individuals, the reassurance of not having that significant out-of-pocket expense exposure if something does happen, but preferring to pay a higher premium to get that, you're always going to have somewhat of a distinction. I think my recollection of the addition of that plan was that the district wanted to give people more choices based upon the premiums that they would be paying into those respective plans. But to your point, those are things that we evaluate as part of the renewal process to say, if this plan's performing better than the other, do you structure your rates in such a way that people are paying if they want to purchase up to that greater value PPO plan?
And to that point, the increases in our healthcare costs, I think the last time it was estimated that each of the plans would have about a 6% increase. Is it the same thing that we're still applying, that we still apply the increase evenly across all the plans?
It's still the case that you can, but you don't necessarily have to. So that's part of what I would say is the evaluation process as we look at renewals each year.
Okay, so shifting over so that we're applying the higher rates to the PPO and 1,500 plan. Okay.
Correct.
I appreciate that. We went over the pharmacy costs quite a bit. Out of our total healthcare spend, what percent were the pharmacy costs?
They were about, I think, hovering around 21%. It used to be lower, around 15 to 18%, generally speaking, but we're definitely seeing the trend as it's more of an 80-20 split in this day and age.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I would just second Vice President Sanowski's comment that the education aspect is very important, and choosing when to go to the ER or to the urgent care center is a very important thing to understand. Also, the preventative care, obviously this year down because of coronavirus, but it is so important because getting that testing is free. And that testing can save your life. It can also save you unnecessary expenses down the road, and it's better for everyone's health. So the educational aspect is fantastic. I really support doing everything we can to increase that, and however we can help and work with Kairos to achieve that would be greatly appreciated. Board Member Beckman?
You just jogged a question in my mind. Do we still have, either, Shannon, you may know, do we still have the healthcare committee that has like Leslie Sharp on it and whatnot that helps to educate about the choices, et cetera?
We do. In fact, they're actually meeting tomorrow afternoon. So they still meet. They've had meetings almost monthly the past couple of months where they look at what are the concerns that they're hearing out at the school sites, things that they think we need to address as adding to our insurance policies, or maybe the things that we have that aren't necessarily the best direction to go. So they do have that committee. That committee talks, discusses things. That gets brought back to me. And then decisions that they've made I would then talk to Dr. Menzel about, and then of course, you all and the Self-Insurance Trust Board.
Do we put out a summary about it all for all of the employees, about some of those, so that maybe all of our employees can see what concerns were brought up, what concerns were addressed as far as trying to educate?
We haven't, but that's certainly something we can look into. I mean, we do keep meeting minutes of all of that. It's all documented as to what was discussed and who brought that forth. They do vote on things as to if this is a change that they'd like to propose.
Yeah.
Let's vote on that and decide if that's unanimously something they want. But we can definitely look into
I would
addressing that
appreciate
more
looking
for.
into that, because I know they are an incredible resource. In fact, I know Nurse Sharp has been on it for many, many years. So not only do they understand what's going on currently, there is that historical as well, where they can speak to why this is better, why this is not better, and kind of help. But I would appreciate you looking into.
Yes, they do. And in fact, Kairos participates too, so that they can say, okay, that's something that would really, that would really raise the price up, or that would be a problem if we did, or no, that's a great idea. This is how that could benefit your plan. So we can definitely look into that.
Are there any further board member questions or comments? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you as well.
The board will now move to agenda item 8, consent agenda, board action required. The chair moves to approve the consent agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Are you going to skip 7D?
Yeah, wait,
Oh, geez.
7D.
I am losing my mind.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
I understand. It's
We will
keep it
actually
moving,
move to
but-
item 7D. Review of 2021-2022 employee salary schedules and benefits. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. As we mentioned last fall, we would be bringing forward not only the salary schedule, but also benefit review as a part of our standard business practice. I'd like to ask Dr. Bowman and Shannon Crozier if you can come forward and review the proposals. And while they come forward, the other point that I would like to reiterate is that I've said at the last few meetings, I think it's really important as a district that we spend the time developing a comprehensive compensation and benefit structure for the entire organization, so that as we look at these things in the future, we have a strategy in place designed to attract and retain the very best talent we can here in Scottsdale Unified, so that our students are able to achieve at the highest level. With that, I'd like to turn over to Dr. Bowman.
Good evening, Governing Board, Board President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, board members, Dr. Menzel, Gladys, and the few remaining guests. In the spirit of hearing you at the last meeting about efficiency of board meetings, what you have is, the presentation is just an overview, and then in your package you have the salary schedule. So you're not going to see slides of each individual salary schedule. And we do this annually, so this is a very similar process. What we were asked to do is do a 2% increase for the following groups that you can see listed there. So in your salary schedules, you'll see that 2% reflected. I think it's important to note that there's a couple ways you can do 2%. One is you can move everybody 2%, or for the few salary schedules that actually have movement within cells, you can move a step, is what it's called. We chose, in this case, to move everybody 2%. So that as the tide rises, everybody rises 2%. What that does mean is there's no movement for steps. I think that's important to know, because not every employee group has the table, and you'll see that as reflected in your packets. That's really something I think our district has done many years past. Julie, I might weigh on you a little bit. I think you were here for some of the history, but from 2008 through 2013, where those were some really lean years that I think that schedules were actually frozen. And so in those cases, we have a table, but the table for all purposes hasn't been followed. So it's hard to look at that and say, I have this many years of experience and this is where I should be. It's because of the history of the district. So what I think when we look at this comprehensive schedule, this is going to be on my soapbox for a minute. I think it would behoove us to look very carefully at just a range for all groups. In the range, I was in other districts where we've done that. It's a nice way to do it. I don't want to scare anybody, but it's just a nice way to look at it. And it might be a good opportunity when we look at a comprehensive salary schedule for our whole district. So there's a couple other highlights within this. In the classified, we had an IRT come up tonight and share with us and talk about how their jobs have changed, and we agree. And Dr. Menzel and I, we've been meeting with SSPA, and in your salary schedules, you'll see that we have made a recommended change from salary from F to G for the IRTs. So if you look at the 2021, when you get to that, you have 2021, you have the current year, and then you also have the proposed for 21-22. And you'll see the instructional resource assistant moved from F to G. We also had, and Shannon mentioned this earlier in one of the budget meetings, that we were looking at reclassifying just a couple groups this year. The other one is our instructional support paras 1 and 2. When we looked at the instructional support paras compared to our district across the valley, we're either second or last in our pay for our instructional paras. So we're proposing also to move them a classification, which should make us more competitive within that market. And those are, in large part, when we start looking at vacant positions like we've been examining those, that's an area where we've got to do better on our compensation for a couple reasons. One is to attract, and number 2 is to retain, and number 3, because it's the right thing to do. So anyway, you'll see that. Those are 2 critical highlights. We did also look very carefully at our subs. I know that we have had a lot of attention on our subs. What I'd like to share with you is just some data from the recent weeks, is that we've been trending pretty good. We've been getting fill rates of close to 90%. We've been in the 80s on our really hard to fill days, which we had before COVID. We're in the 70s. We're still in the 70s, maybe the high 60s. Now, any day that you have one sub that's unfilled, it's a tremendous burden on our schools. But we've made significant strides in increasing our sub pool. We've hired over 120 subs since October. So our efforts to market and get people in is paying off. Would I say it's perfect? No. Would I say that they're compensated enough? No. But when you look at the 10 comparables that we are, we're behind 2 of the districts, and we have a couple other districts that have done some creative ideas I think we can still consider and possibly bring back to the board. Maybe not this spring, but maybe as we continue to examine that. And that's specifically the Dysart School District has a really unique way of flipping the pyramid, as they would speak. But I did want you to know, we looked very carefully at that. We're right in near the top. All of us are right around 100, 105, 108 for just the first sub. And we do also, we have our long-term subs with our certified. If they have a teaching certificate versus just having a sub-certificate, we do have a differential in paying that already. Not significant, nothing like what Mesa's doing. So Mesa's the industry leader, and just want you to know we looked at it. We think we're okay for right now with the raises that are in there. The other groups that we have are your 1.5% increase to your principals and your assistant principals, and then the 1% increase to the district level admin, executive directors, and cabinet. So you'll see all of the pay ranges in there, and you'll see the 2021, and then you'll see the reflected increases for the 1%, 1.5%, and 2%. So this was trying to give the overview. You have the backup. What we'll do between now, this is a presentation night. We'll give you some more backup on the paras and the IRAs and the subs. I'll give you all of those studies so you can at least see those. Do I have any questions?
Could we complete the presentation before moving to questions and
Sure.
comments? Thank you.
Employee benefits. Shannon.
Well, I don't know. That's kind of hard to follow up when you talked about all the great salary increases that we're working on. So this is a new part that we've never done before. We've never brought to the board what the employee benefits look like for each of our classifications. But we felt with transparency it was important to do. I will also say that I don't think it's something a lot of districts do. I don't know that it's always something a lot of districts want to have out there. Good or bad, we're showing that, and so this is where we are with our different groups. One of the things to keep in mind is that not all eligible employees enroll in benefits. The other thing is, when we look at these, we look at averages quite a bit. The different plans, and Kairos just talked about this, the different plans have different rates depending on which plan you pick, so we kind of have to do what is the average depending on what folks pick. This is based off of the December 20th enrollment, and again, some things can vary depending on the selections that the employee makes. So with that, with the certified employee benefits, essentially there's 2 parts to that. There's the employee paid medical. If you choose to, add a spouse or family members on, that's a cost to the employee. But the district does provide the employee paid portion of that. We also provide $50,000 worth of life insurance to our certified employees. So for the 1,361 eligible employees that participate in that total comes up to about $8.8 million. We're looking at the classified employees. It's really the same that we offer to the certified. It's the employee medical portion, as well as $50,000 worth of life insurance. There's about 849 employees in there, and so that total comes up to $5.5 million. The administrators have similar, but they've added an entire paid life insurance for the those that are on the administrative contract. That portion for about 152 employees comes out to just over $1 million. And then the last one that we get into is the cabinet employee benefits. These are benefits that are have been pointed out or spelled out into the cabinet's contract each year. And so with that, there's the travel allowance is actually car allowance that's put in there instead of doing mileage. A TSA contribution, and again, that's varied off of what their salary is, so it varies depending on the cabinet member. Employee paid medical, similar to all the other groups. Life insurance is actually $75,000 plus 1 times their salary, so it's a little bit higher life insurance. And then there's some miscellaneous insurances that are in there as well, that total. And so for the 6 employees that are in the cabinet group, that total comes to $170,958. As for next steps, March 2nd, so the next board meeting, we will come back for approval of the salary schedules and employee benefits. If that's approved, then the next step would be the authorization to issue contracts on March 2nd. Certified is the first group that would receive their contracts. We do that early so that we can capture our certified employees. That is tentatively scheduled for March 4th, which is a Thursday. We like to do it on Thursdays, so if there's any issues, we can address them before the weekend. April 8th for the administrative employee contracts, and then April 29th for the classified notice of appointment, which is just basically saying we have a position for you next year. With that, are there any questions?
Before we move to questions and comments, I would like to present a recommendation to the board. We have a superintendent, facilities, and finance committee that is tasked with reviewing matters of this nature. They have not been able to convene due to time constraints, but in speaking with Dr. Menzel, I believe the most appropriate course of action would be to, absent board member objection, to allow the 3 board members who are not members of that committee to share their comments and questions at this time, and allow the committee members to then convene, take those into account, take into account their own views, discuss that, and then present a final recommendation on Monday. On March 2nd. I'm all out of sorts tonight. So long as Board Member Lindsay and Board Member Hartwells and the rest of the board are amenable to that position, I would proceed to calling on Board Member Beckman and then Vice President Sanowski and myself for any comments and questions. Is that amenable to the board?
Yeah.
Excellent. Board Member Beckman.
I just had a quick question. So do you know what percentage of our employees do not choose our benefits? Just a guess. I mean, I'm not.
Don't know that I know, I think we had in there that 441 employees have waived. I think we had a higher percentage this last year when we did open enrollment. We really made a lot of efforts to get people signed up for insurance. So I think for this year, when we went into it, it's a higher amount enrolled. Percent-wise, I mean, I don't have that. I would say, based off the fact that 441 waived it, we're doing fairly well considering we have, what's hard, because it's only for employees that are 0.75 or above. But I mean, I think we have a high percentage that are, I couldn't tell you I don't know.
We have a high percentage that choose it, or a high percentage
that do choose, that are choosing our
it?
insurance. Yes, and I do believe that we had more people participate this year than we've had in the past.
Well, that was my next question. Is it pretty consistent, the percentage maybe, I don't know if Jed would know, that choose it and that versus that don't choose it?
No, I'd have to look at the data for the past couple of years and look at that, but we can definitely see how many, what
The only reason I ask, obviously, is it's a considerable expense to this district, and, you know, if you have these variations for whatever reason, can change. I mean, the first time, it doesn't happen here, obviously, but the first time I had to negotiate a contract where, in the private sector, where the individual did not choose our benefits package, it shocked me that I had to go back and renegotiate because they wanted more money in their salary to offset the fact that they didn't take our benefits.
Oh, okay.
Because they knew it was such a value add to us to have them not choose our benefits because it cost us less for that employee. So I was just curious if we had any sort of tracker that showed us if it stayed consistent, the number that didn't. And you don't have to answer tonight. This spurred me on.
We definitely have records of within our payroll records, we know who selected it. So yes, we can definitely look to see in the past few years, how have we done, how many people are participating and what percentages are participating. We can definitely get that information.
It's nothing you have to go, but I just was curious about things.
Vice President Sanowski.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of my questions is, do we roll back any incentives to our employees for not choosing a district option?
We don't. I know in the past we had charged employees apart, and so that, I think, kept people from enrolling if they knew that they were going to have to pay a certain, a few dollars each month or towards that. We haven't done that of late, and so there's nothing that we do. If you don't select our insurance, there's nothing that we do to incentivize you to or not to take the insurance. I do, like I said, I know we really made a strong push, because if you don't enroll by a certain date, if you miss it and you just decide, oh, whoops, I wanted to do that. We can't put you back in there unless there's a life change event. So we really did push this last year. We sent out texts to people, they emailed. So we made a stronger push than we've ever done to get people to enroll and make sure that we get everybody captured. But we've not done any incentive one way or the other on that.
Do we have a declared enrollment date in
We
place?
do it within a period, and we don't have that scheduled for this year yet. It's generally in April, May. It's usually about 2 weeks. We send out all kinds of notifications saying open enrollment is going to be opening on this date. We're going to be doing virtual town hall meetings with people, so we'll have Kairos, United Healthcare, our own benefits department there. So if people have questions about what selections should I make or how does this work, they can get those questions answered. So we'll do those town halls. There's a lot of communication that goes out saying, this is when open enrollment starts or open enrollment has started. And then once it gets going, we pound it really hard. And we'll send out notifications to supervisors saying, these are the employees who haven't done anything. Please check with them. So we just don't have the dates set specific for this year yet.
I do appreciate the communication. As a former employee, I remember getting those. April and May are very crazy months typically for school employees. So it kind of like if the more advance notice that someone has, the better, they can educate themselves on some of their options as well. I actually would like for us to think about creating some incentives for our employees that choose to maybe not go with our insurance. I think it could be a district savings in itself, even if it's a small amount. And then I did have a question for Dr. Bowman on the sub, and you did say you're going to bring those back. So one thing I really want to hear is, what are some of those varied levels of substitute compensation? You'd mentioned teaching certifications and long-term subs. I'd like to see those outlined in what the district's offering is. I'm aware of what the beginning pay is. I believe I've seen long-term sub pay, but I know there are districts that are offering substantial compensation for people that have certifications, teaching certifications, to come back and be a district sub. So I'd like to see what those are.
I'll present that to you.
Thank you, appreciate that.
You're welcome.
You had talked about incentives. One thing I will say is that if you don't choose our insurance, you have to provide proof that you have insurance through another means. Typically, it's through their spouse, and generally you'll hear things like, well, it's covered through my spouse's company, or I like what they provide more.
Okay, another comment about when I was going through the 9 different attachments that we received on this, I just wanted, because I know there might be individuals who don't understand that the guidance counselor salary schedule, theirs is different from certified teachers because they are expected to work additional days before the school year starts as well as after, as I understand. Is that still correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So to put that out there so there wasn't a questioning about that, although it would be a valid question. I do like the idea that those serving on the committee will come back with a recommendation. I have lots of ideas as well, but I'd like to hear, after carefully examining this information, what the recommendations would be. I do want us to be the district who, we say we value student learning. I want all of our expenditures to go as close to student learning as possible. And that would be my own personal opinion as one of 5. But I see that always, you put your money where your mouth is. And, there are lots of sayings that support that as well. I wouldn't ask someone to do something that I'm not willing to do as well. So just kind of throwing that out there.
Vice President Sanowski, in the hopes to make the recommendation as robust as possible, would you like to point out those ideas for their consideration or for them to address, much like we have with the reopen plans, the full reopen plans?
Yes. For one, I was looking at, maybe Shannon, you could answer this. I was looking at the stipends and the doctorate stipend. Is that an ongoing stipend every year for a person who has their doctorate?
Yes, it is.
So when I'm looking at the certified salary schedule, it goes to 72 or a PhD for certified staff, and that locks them in, correct? Except for the year experience if that's given, the step.
Yeah, so once you get to that final column, then, yeah, it's either, the increases are, I mean, there's no more we don't tack on anymore if you continue to take more education. So it would either be.
You're at the end.
You're at the end, essentially, yeah.
So then why don't we do that for other positions where doctorates, like administrative positions where doctorates are earned and then re-anteed up with the stipend?
I don't know that I can effectively answer that, but I would like to just share that a doctorate on the teacher's schedule compared to a BA plus zero, they make $13,000 a year more, and that carries every year. So they're making $13,000 more than somebody who doesn't have it. So
Did you say a BA plus zero?
yeah, so somebody who's a starting teacher, so our system, and this is just, I've only been here 3 years, but we reward education.
Sure.
We value that.
I
And
think
so-
all districts do.
So when you look at the certificated staff, the value of a doctorate for a certificated staff member is $13,000 annually. And that promulgates through, so they get that every year because
Right.
they've earned it. So, and I'm not making a case for or against on the administrator, because I wasn't here when that was put in place, but it's been in place since 1996, 95. And so it started off with, I think the original was 500 and 250 for a 12-month versus 10-month. And then as you went through the years, I think, I don't have it in front of me, I'm just going off of memory, I think it was around 2,000, somewhere in that range where it went up to 3,000, and then that's where that change was. So I can't make a judgment one way or the other, I just know that there's value for both in both groups.
Okay. I don't think we're comparing apples to apples, though, because certified personnel, it's, what is it, every 15 credits they could potentially
The
earn
horizontal
a
move, yes.
horizontal movement?
Yeah.
Okay. So to get to that doctorate, which I don't think has been a longstanding practice for us to include a doctorate level for certified employees, correct?
I couldn't answer that.
Okay,
It's been in
I-
place for 3 years.
Yeah, I think it's about that where it was added, because I think it was master's plus 72.
Yep, they're equivalent.
Yeah. So I just was asking that question of why is it for one group of employees continued throughout their career, whereas it's not for the other?
I don't know that I can answer the why.
And that's fine. Just asking that question.
Yep, good question.
I would like to ask that, I noticed in looking at the curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular salary schedule or the stipends, that there was a group missing from that compensation, and I think it's very important to add them. And that would be at step 4. I believe it has band, strings, but one group that's missing, and it's been a developing program in our district, is middle school theater. And I know those teachers put a lot of time into their performances, whether they're remote, online, or in person. And I know in the past, those teachers have been asked to dock hours and go through extracurricular funds. And I just feel like the right thing to do is to add them to that group for a stipend.
Okay.
The middle school theater teachers for that. I'm looking through my list here. I would like to put forth that I do think that the travel allowance for cabinet should go away. I think they should be if they're expected to travel for their job, that they should be able to just go into the same mileage reimbursement as other employees. It doesn't make sense to me to have that great of an incentive, financial incentive, for a vehicle to go to and from work. And that pretty much covers my list.
Board Member Beckman?
Just a couple quick things. I had brought this up a while back. I'm not shy or quite sure I agreed or understood the answer. Regarding the doctoral stipend, there's most likely just two positions, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I wasn't necessarily in agreement with paying a doctoral stipend for an employee when we hired them if it was required for the position. For instance, for an attorney or for our superintendent, if the job posting required that, and then you gave them the stipend when you hired them as well, I didn't really see how we could support that. And so I would be curious as to get thoughts on that at some point, if that is something that needs to be reconsidered or reworked to make sure that it's not required, or does it become part of a base pay type of thing? I do appreciate you bringing up the middle school thing, because I have myself seen that we've had an inequity sometimes as we hire teachers because they're asked to do certain things, like maybe a musical or a play or whatever, and some will choose to and some will choose not to. And so maybe if that compensation is made a little more equitable, then you'll have a more equitable program that's provided. It was unfair, as far as I could see, that some of our middle school kids would get that at that level and then some would not. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I agree that the mileage thing needs to be considered.
Well, thank you for that. Dr. Menzel has my comments already, so I won't share them here again. The committee can review them and we can discuss that more fully, and they're broadly in line with the comments that Board Member Beckman and Vice President Sanowski have already brought up. The only thing I would add is that we were asked by one employee concerning the classified IRA grouping for our librarians.
And that's already done.
Isn't that
Why is it still here? Well, darn it.
Yeah.
That is fast work.
That's the speed of Scottsdale at its
Works at
finest.
high speed here. All right. Thank you very much. Are there any final comments or questions? Excellent. And we look forward to the committee review and recommendation on March 2nd.
Thank you.
President Greenberg, can we take a recess maybe?
Yes. Without objection, we will take a 5-minute recess and reconvene at 7:27 p.m. The board is reconvening at 7:29 PM. The board will now move to agenda item 8, consent agenda, board action required. The chair moves to approve the consent agenda as presented. Is there a second? Vice President Sanowski seconds. Is there any debate? It is moved and seconded that the board approve the consent agenda as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to agenda item 9, public comments. Are there any additional public comments? There are no additional public comments. The board will now move to agenda item 10A, approval of the intergovernmental agreement, IGA, between SUSD and the City of Scottsdale City for the city auditor to perform an audit of construction redevelopment of Hohokam Elementary School, the Hohokam Bond Project. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg and members of the governing board. As you know, we've spent some time over the last 6 to 8 months having conversations, rekindled conversations about the internal audit function. I'd like to ask Jennifer McLennan to present the recommended intergovernmental agreement with the City of Scottsdale. We do, I believe, also have Sharon Walker available in the cloud to be able to have a conversation if we have questions, but Jennifer has been kind enough to work with us in developing this agreement.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Welcome, board members. We have presented to you a revised version of the intergovernmental agreement that was sent to you earlier. The revisions have been requested by one of the board members this evening. The purpose of the IGA is to create a joint agreement with the City of Scottsdale so that the district may obtain auditing services for the Hohokam Bond Project through the city. The city has its own team of auditors. The cost to the district would be $90,000. That cost is specified within the terms of the IGA. There is a spell-out provision for a number of hours, but the purpose, under the IGA, the district would pay that amount regardless of the number of hours spent. There are various provisions within the body of the IGA that discuss the access to documents, the scope of the audit itself, and the ability for the district and the city to amend this agreement upon written consent of both parties to include other audits in the future if you chose to do that. So with that, I'll take any questions or comments or concerns that any of the board members may have.
Are there any questions or comments about the intergovernmental agreement? Board Member Hartwells.
Just a comment. I want to thank you for answering all of my questions in a very prompt fashion. And then I just want to clarify, the contract before us as amended, while written for a single scope of work, is envisioned to be somewhat of a master agreement under which multiple or more than one scope of work may be added as approved by the board, or are, I think we talked about maybe delegations, kind of what would be that process that's not necessarily spelled out?
Dr. Hartwell, thank you for your question. The board and the city would have to agree to any additional scope of work and any additional costs. So there is a provision within the agreement that states that the parties may choose to do that. You are correct that it is, in its general terms, in all likelihood, an amendment to this agreement would simply redefine the scope of work and redefine the cost, but not the process, access, those types of general provisions.
Thank you. I know I've asked you that. I just wanted to make sure our public understood that.
Board Member Beckman.
Okay. So first, I want to thank you, Board President Greenberg, because I know this was something that was very important to you. And you and I spent much time over the couple of years trying to get an auditor in some fashion back in this district. And so I appreciate you carrying this forward and getting it to this point. I do have a couple questions. Part of my reason years ago in wanting an auditor for the district was, well, there are many reasons, but for transparency for our taxpayers with the use of our funds, obviously. One of the biggest components is you want to make sure that not only with the result of the audit, that that's transparent, but that the process itself is transparent. So with having said that, I have a question for you tonight. You're bringing forth to us as an action item Hohokam. There is no discussion about Hohokam. there was no, this is why we're choosing Hohokam to the board. There was no discussion of the costs of it with the entire board. It's just an action item tonight. I am curious as to why it wasn't a discussion item so that the board or the process could be brought forward about the different projects maybe or other areas that we would have liked to all weigh in on what could have been audited. I can think of a couple right off the bat. For instance, Cherokee had many change orders. Mid-state was something that I know we had discussed about. So how did we arrive at Hohokam? And why is it an action item right off the bat? $90,000 is a lot of money. That's something I would have liked to see as a discussion. Maybe when we came to the $90,000, is that justified, or did we want to put that out for bid? Because that is a lot of money. So I just would like to have a discussion a little bit more around this, even though it is an action item. It's not that I disagree with Hohokam, I just don't know how we got here.
A discussion is permitted on the action item.
It is.
But Dr. Menzel, could you explain the timing aspect of why this was brought to us in the hopes that it would get underway? And then I can explain how we got to a decision on Hohokam, even though I was not a specific part of that decision, why that was done.
So from a timing perspective, and I do believe we kept the governing board apprised of ongoing conversations with the city of Scottsdale on the potential for intergovernmental agreement with the specific intent of, rather than building a redundant system for internal auditing functions. So even if we hired a single individual to do auditing, that person would spend the majority of his or her time in the first year setting up the processes, so not even getting to the audit function itself, whereas we have in the city of Scottsdale people with expertise, including 2 individuals on staff that have school-specific expertise. So the thinking behind this was that we would test the concept of a potential mutually beneficial relationship between the city of Scottsdale and Scottsdale Unified School District through an initial project. And in terms of timing, the city of Scottsdale and our meetings coincide. They, however, have a 10-day advance publication notice for any agenda item. And because there were questions raised even tonight about Hohokam versus any other potential project, they're not going to have this on their agenda until March 16th. It was originally going to be March 2nd was the goal. If, assuming we approved the IGA tonight, they would have sufficient time to put it on the agenda for March 2nd. They would have actually had to have it queued up today. But because of uncertainty about how the governing board would act tonight, the plan is to do it on March 16th. Ultimately, the rate that we're being charged, which is the equivalent of $90 an hour, is not an unreasonable rate. It's actually a pretty good rate for that auditing function with the level of expertise that they have. The issue or question would be the 1,000-hour projection, but what we're looking at is a pretty significant scope of work from the very beginning of a construction project to substantial completion. And if you want to go from there in terms of why we landed on a construction project of that magnitude versus other projects, that would be.
Well, I do want to say one thing, and maybe you can answer it, is you just said the words trial balloon, we're testing this out. It's $90,000, and we just had a deep conversation about paying our employees and making cuts, et cetera, and this trial balloon testing out is $90,000. So I would like to know, before I feel comfortable voting yes on something, what we're hoping to achieve here, what the outcome is, other than just saying we're following best practices by bringing in or partnering with the city, which I fully agree with. What are our goals with auditing Hohokam and paying $90,000?
I would just offer that we have at least 2 more significant construction projects to complete the 2016 bond project. And by auditing what's been done already with either Hohokam or Cherokee, and I'm agnostic in terms of which project, but either one gives us the potential to learn what could be done better. And if there's a way to better use taxpayer dollars to respond to the contractors and to make sure that we are getting the maximum value for the investment for taxpayers in Scottsdale, it's that learning from the audit that can be applied to both the Kiva and Pueblo projects that I think is the value, potential value of choosing a construction project versus something that was a smaller scale.
Let me be careful. You said Pueblo, we haven't approved anything there yet.
Right.
So potential. Okay. Why wouldn't we have put this out for bid then? I mean, that's a lot of money.
Dr. Menzel, Board President Greenberg, Ms. Beckman, in having an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Scottsdale, both the city and the district are recognizing that there's a joint benefit to having the audit completed. And the function of the IGA takes it out of a procurement practice if there is indeed a joint benefit to be had and a joint duty by both entities. I have submitted this to the city attorney, Margaret Wilson, and both of us concur that there is a joint benefit to the entities. The city will have the use of its auditing services, will have a better understanding of the tax concerns that the city residents might feel, and the district has the benefit of the audit. So those recitals contained within there can cover those items. The cost of the audit is below the $100,000 threshold. That is a procurement threshold that would require you, if you were not using city services, but were using a private audit firm.
400 or 100?
$100,000. That in a terms of a procurement, you would need to only find 3 written quotes. So if you were going to go out to a private entity.
But okay.
So if I can provide some context, the former board member, Beckham, had asked in, I believe, October, that I do a review of our policies, provide recommended revisions for the policy committee review, and for her review, and put together a memo which has been shared with you all, minus certain parts that are not relevant for this discussion, about internal auditing and the explanation of it. She had asked me as part of that to provide some ideas for what could be audited. My ideas were mainly departmental ideas, such as an internal audit of our special education services and needs. I believe it was former board member Beckham who presented the idea of doing a construction audit, given that it is a high value figure. It's $24 million for both of these projects. We do potentially have, we do have one more rebuild and potentially have that second rebuild. And especially in the long-term plans, if we are going to go out for another bond, making sure that we are very clear about taxpayer money and the transparency there and potential savings would be the best target. That was not, I agreed with that. I understood that rationale. I didn't challenge that. I think it makes reasonable sense. So I believe the continuation there of Hohokam or Cherokee, whichever school it is just a continuation from that specific thought process. Now, I will say, Board Member Beckham has emailed us now, and her view is that $90,000 is an expensive, is more expensive than what she was expecting when she was on the board, which I appreciate. However, this is a new auditor, so they are working with us for the first time. They will have to get used to our systems and to our personnel. They will have to learn much more about our system. They fortunately have 2 things that, Deloitte or KPMG or PwC or any major or minor internal auditing firm that conducts these types of things probably would not have, which is 2 individuals who are highly experienced on education and a number of individuals who are highly experienced on government construction projects, which the city of Scottsdale does. So they do bring certain expertise that would be beneficial without having to do a bid process. There are mutually beneficial systems in place. I know the city of Scottsdale is very interested, and as are we, to build that relationship with them. And there are, of course, many issues involving taxpayer money. We are part of the property tax system. It's something they have to account for. Bond projects that they go out for when they raise bonds, we have to account for. There's a lot there. I do agree with Allison to the extent that it is an expense. $90,000 is more. I was expecting $100,000, so in my mind it was cheaper than I expected. But I do want to reiterate that hiring an individual, even if that individual were capable of performing mid-tier audits on his or her own, a chief audit executive would cost $90,000 at the bottom. That's what Valley Metro has just put out for, 92, I believe, $130,000. So salary plus benefits for one individual, yes, that's the chief audit executive level, but you're not going to hire someone lower who has no large-scale organizational accounting. Now, I guess you could argue, well, why don't we do an even smaller project that isn't construction-related? But as I said, I think the rationale was very much about targeting a high-dollar figure issue. We know that we've had a number of questions raised by former and current board members about construction costs, whether they're in line, whether there are any issues with procurement, all of that. So I think that's really the rationale for it. Again, it is expensive in this time, but all internal audits, the objective is always, well, the objective isn't always the same, but for this type of audit, the objective is the same, to find efficiencies, to find cost savings, and to educate us on what to do and what not to do for future projects.
Okay, thank you for that. I did print out and read through what you put together, and it was quite comprehensive. I do appreciate that. I need to understand what the process is going to be going forward. And the reason I ask this is because going back to the reason I supported an auditor or an auditing department, et cetera, in the first place, was specifically to make sure that what was being audited was what is something that the board wanted audited. You see the conflict if a superintendent, and I'm not going to go back a couple of years, and a board president or anyone else for that matter comes to the board and says, this is what I want audited. I mean, you can see where that can go a little bit awry. So I want to understand the process going forward on how what we're going to audit is going to be chosen.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable discussion to be had, and I think the point would be to, of course, leave that to the board to decide. In consultation with the auditing team, I will note that part of the recommendations or part of the policies that would be brought forward to the policy committee for recommendation or review is the formation of an audit committee. That is a standard committee, part of any organization, including other districts that do have, whether in this state or other states, pretty robust internal audit and external audit procedures. And it would usually be that committee taking into account interviews with board members and administrators. It would usually be that committee that formulates the audit plan with the internal auditors that we had. And of course, board members can weigh in, but the idea of the audit committee is usually to have area experts, people who are experts in accounting and auditing and risk management, who would make those decisions. Because of course, while I am somewhat familiar with it, me voting to choose as a board projects that I care about, it doesn't necessarily address the risk. So projects are usually chosen by your chief audit executive, presented to the board for discussion and approval. That's the standard process. And of course, if you have that committee in place, it would be the committee that does that and gets board approval.
And I thoroughly agree with that. And I also agree with the partnership with the city. As I stated when I began, it's the process itself and how we arrived here that I had concerns with. I still would have liked to seen a couple of things presented to the board as discussion and have the board understood what we were hoping for the outcome on the 1, 2, or 3 items, the goals, how much each would cost, and then have us decide effectively where we thought we wanted to start. I know there was a time constraint, but that's what I would have liked to have seen, and I hope in the future that's more of kind of the direction we go. But I applaud us getting this going, truly, and all the work you put into it.
I appreciate that. In the absence of a committee or a chief audit executive in this sense, I think we move forward on the mutual understanding that the recommendation would be to do a construction audit. So if you don't agree with the construction audit or you want to discuss it further, that's fine. I mean, I don't know how the other board members feel. That's obviously open to the board to either vote no or to table this, should they wish. Are there any further board member comments or questions? Vice President Sanowski?
Yes, and I'm hoping that through this audit that we become better with our practices. And so I think this is going to be enlightening, especially with potentially 1, 2, with more rebuilds, construction projects going on. I know we haven't even finished all of them from our last bond. So I'm looking forward to learning about our systems that we have in place and improving upon them to potentially save financials.
Thank you. Are there any further board member questions or comments? I do have a couple things with the contract. Given the amendments, I would personally, in paragraph 4, we use the term all documentation reasonably related, and we've added the term personnel who have direct knowledge. We've also added the term direct knowledge in paragraph 6. Could we comment as to why we added those language, what the reason was? Because that's usually language that limits the internal auditor's ability to seek documentation or personnel for reviewing these matters. Board Member Harwell.
I'll respond because I requested it, and that was to put some scope boundaries on the amount of time that the personnel here at SUSD would have to commit. Arguably, right, any who have knowledge, it doesn't say current school district personnel, just to add some meets and bounds to the legal scope of the contract. Same thing with the paragraph 6 change, directly related contracts.
Okay. To an extent, I understand that. I don't want to end up in an issue where our personnel are denying requests on the basis that they don't believe it's reasonable, since who determines what is reasonable? That's
Well,
why
then that's
we
a
don't.
discussion between the principals, but what you don't want is mission creep away from the scope of what this is really about, right? This would be the same kind of request I'd ask of somebody else,
So
to be specific.
with it, so if the billing paragraph 10, the bill is for 90,000, correct?
Yes.
So if they spend 2,000 hours on this project, the bill is 90,000.
No, that amendment now allows the principals to speak before the 2,000 hours gets incurred. If it appears the project's going to exceed 1,000 hours, there has to be a prior approval before those hours are exceeded. So no additional costs are incurred without the district, through Dr. Menzel, having the ability to have to green light those additional expenditures. So it is a $90,000 floor, but also a gate, so to speak.
But that's, my question is a little different. My question is that relevant, since if the bill is, this all ties in together, the bill is $90,000 for this audit, correct?
Correct. The district is agreeing to pay, the school district is agreeing to pay the city $90,000 for the audit.
Right.
The language that was added by Dr. Hartwells in paragraph 10 would allow the city to ask for additional money.
The language before didn't contemplate if there was any overrun. It just had language that was, will pay the bill upon being billed. So this was just to ferret out.
I just want to be very clear, because to Board Member Beckman's point, and my understanding of this entire contract was that that wouldn't be something we would want to add, because we are telling them we are paying $90,000 for this audit, start to finish. If they only spend 800 hours on this contract, legally, we would still pay them $90,000. If they spend 2,000 hours on this contract, legally, we would only pay them $90,000. By implementing this, are we trying to open up the possibility that more, and this goes to the mission creep. It's unlikely that they're going to mission creep if they've budgeted $90,000 on a fixed contract. I mean, I can speak from experience at Deloitte. We always told clients, because most clients want, back in the UK, I don't know what the practice is here, most clients do not want to pay hourly rates. So they pay a fixed rate, and we tell them, okay, we'd say internally, we expect it takes 1,000 hours. And we get yelled at if it takes 1,500 hours because we still get paid the same amount.
I understand
Right.
what your point. I do believe this language embraces a reality, which is it puts a gate. You don't have to authorize anything above and beyond what's already here. But by leaving it silent, what happens if there is an overrun? You're saying they eat it and just be silent on the language?
Well, that's because that's what the contract says, is it not?
So my understanding is this was being shaped as a master agreement under which different scopes of work would be added. And so to think more, I guess, broadly in terms of its functionality, in terms of implementing contracts, I believe that language is important to have, if anything, to establish what's the process, at least a little bit of a process, should there be an overrun. Or if there isn't, or if there is, that there is a process that we can stop the overrun before it happens.
Yeah, I think the only reason I don't mean to take up much time on this, but the reason I'm confused is my understanding is that there should be no reason, if that language were not in there, they could not come to us and say, ooh, we really messed up. This is actually going to take us 2,000 hours, and so we need you to pay us more. That's not permitted.
Yeah, agreed. I understand. But what I'm saying is the reality of the situation is we don't want I'm not assuming that the city auditor is going to try to bilk that potential loophole. It isn't to create a loophole, but rather you also don't want the auditor to prematurely end their analysis because at 1,000 hours, they're done. They've earned their money. So why don't we see what the work product looks like if this were to even become an issue and have a somewhat of a process to deal with it. It's not an invitation to overspend. It's a process for a possibility that might exist for which no one's obligated to pay.
President Greenberg, Dr. Hartwells, might I offer a suggestion?
Yeah.
Which is that why don't again, the city has added some extra time in there, given the changes that came in on Friday and our quick review to get them to the board tonight. Why don't I suggest that we place language in there stating that for this audit, the cost is $90,000 regardless of whether the city goes above the project estimate or not. And for future audits, the scope of work will define if there is an overrun. That would be my suggestion.
Right. And just to clarify, that is my understanding, that for all future projects, the scope of work, the specific scope of work and bill would be a new amendment, essentially an addendum to the contract that we approve per the contract. It's not that we're just adding projects without amending this.
Well, of course, that language is here in section 12, right?
Right, so I just want to be clear because I don't want it to come, I don't want anyone to read this and go, well, you said it was 90,000, because that's what's going to be asked of me. You said it was 90,000, but then you approved an additional 20,000, even though the contract said 90,000. So it's not something I'm used to, having worked in this industry. That's why I was trying to understand the scope terminology. But I think maybe just moving this to the second. I only got these amendments today, so that's why I have the questions tonight. So is it possible, could we table this until March 2nd?
My suggestion would be, if you don't have any concerns regarding the remaining amendments, that you approve the IGA tonight, subject and direct me to formulate different language regarding paragraph 10 as approved by your council and the city council. And I will make sure that I carry out the board's direction in defining that this audit will cost $90,000 regardless of the project estimate for the number of hours, but that future audits might redefine that scope of work.
Okay. In that case, the chair moves to approve the intergovernmental agreement as amended, subject to the direction to our legal counsel that legal counsel work with the City of Scottsdale Legal Counsel to further amend the language in Section 10 to make it clear that this contract is for $90,000 and that future contracts, future projects, and their expenses be approved by the board. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve the intergovernmental agreement as amended, subject to the direction so provided to legal counsel. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries
No,
five.
nay.
Apologies.
Okay.
All those opposed?
Opposed, and for the reasons I stated before, not because I'm opposed to the IGA with the city or the premise of having an auditor, just because of the process.
Point well taken, and I think it is something we can correct moving forward. The motion carries 4-1, with Board Member Beckman voting no. The board will now move to Agenda Item 10B, Approval of Award of RFQ Number 210126, Construction Manager at Risk for Kiva Elementary School to McCarthy. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. Shannon Crozier is here to provide a brief synopsis of the process and then answer any questions. Items B and C are both interrelated, and so we'll turn it over to Shannon.
Thank you. Board President Greenberg, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and guests. Kiva was selected as the next school to do construction on. As a part of that process, procurement sent out requests for qualifications for CMAR at risk. That's the process that we have used in the past for other school rebuilds or remodels. We received 7 proposals for that. We had a team that went through those proposals, evaluated it, and then narrowed it down to 4 to do an interview with. The team interviewed the 4 that we had selected, and from that chose McCarthy as their unanimous selection for the CMAR for Kiva. Part of the process for CMAR is that we start with a pre-construction agreement. There is a very lengthy contract that was attached to this. We took basically 2 processes and put them into one. That was a process that we had done beforehand with Hohokam, but it also gave us the ability to make sure that the contract was more in line with our side of what was best for us. In the past, contracts were sometimes more aligned with the builder. So that process, we actually, Jennifer McClellan actually put together that whole contract for us to use. It's a process of determining the pre-construction, and you'll see the next item is determining that pre-construction cost. The second part of that is once we've done the pre-construction, they've gotten the award for that, they can go back and start going to work on what they need to do, meeting with the architect, meeting with the community, looking at the property, what is involved with utilities, what is involved with the build, what do we need to do. And from that, they come back with what's called a GMP, or guaranteed maximum price. So the document that you saw, the contract attached with this, is a work in progress because we start out with the pre-construction, and then as we move forward, then they can start into the next process, which is the GMP. The GMP, once that is determined, and I will say that takes months to determine that, and looking at all of that, we'll come back to the board. If we approve the pre-construction, go with McCarthy, the GMP comes in, and the board looks at it and says, that is just not what we want, that is way above, or this is not what, we're not happy with this situation, then that contract, we can stop the contract, and we're not on the hook then for the rest of it. So it's kind of a 2-step process, but there is one very lengthy contract that we have that is in the board packet. To move forward, we would need to sign that contract to move forward with the pre-construction services. However, as we go through that process, that contract will then be amended once we have more of the details and have the GMP information from McCarthy. With that, are there any questions?
Are there any board member questions or comments? Shannon, do you have any more comments or questions?
No, that's what we have. That's the first item that we have, is just approving that that go to McCarthy for the Kiva CMAR.
The chair moves to approve Agenda Item 10B, approval of award of RFQ number 210126, construction manager at risk for Kiva Elementary School to McCarthy. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Beckman seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve the award of RFQ number 210106, construction manager at risk for Kiva Elementary School to McCarthy. Is there any further debate? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to Agenda Item 10C, approval of pre-construction services contract for RFQ number 210126, construction manager at risk for Kiva Elementary School. Dr. Menzel?
This is the specific contract for the dollar amount related to pre-construction services. Shannon, if you'd like to detail how that was calculated.
Yes, so what they basically did, we used the same process that we used for Hohokam. You can do a flat rate or you can do a percentage. We did 0.7% of the estimated construction cost, the estimated construction cost being $18.5 million, which is how we got to the $129,500 for pre-construction services for McCarthy to move forward. That was agreed upon between us as well as McCarthy as part of that service. Are there any questions on that part of it?
Are there any board member questions or comments about Agenda Item 10C? Vice President Sanowski.
Is that 0.7, is that a pretty standard?
Yes, that's what we've done for Hohokam. I believe that is a standard. Our purchasing department looked at that as well in conjunction with Dennis Rayler to what would be the appropriate, and that is the standard
Thank you.
amount for that.
Are there any further questions or comments? The chair moves to approve Agenda Item 10C, approval of pre-construction services contract for RFQ number 210126, construction manager at risk for Kiva Elementary School. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Beckman seconds. It is moved and approved. It is moved that the board approve the approval of construction services contract for RFQ number 210126, construction manager at risk for Kiva Elementary School. Is there any further debate? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to Agenda Item 11A, future items for consideration. Do any board members have any future items for consideration? Board Member Beckman.
Because this is timely, and we spent some significant time as a board on this last year, and I would just like a cohesive discussion item regarding our evaluation process with regard to every step, right? Our classified versus certified, administrators, et cetera.
Are there any other future comments? Board Member Hart-Wells.
And I am open to these topics being put in through committee first, if that's what Dr. Menzel and the board is agreeable to, but has come up in a few previous board meetings, the board-initiated caps or thresholds in the cash accounts. We could get some discussion around that, and again, if that the board wishes to put that through committee first and then come out, that Ms. Kosher had even referenced that perhaps that needs revisited. Also, that's come up in the budget discussions is the indirect cost calculations. That would be another issue or topic that would be of interest to me as to how we arrived where we're at and how do we move forward, what kind of standard operating procedure there. I would be very keen to hear sooner than later what the status is on the acceleration efforts and more specific kind of action items that have been distilled to the top, percolated to the top. And then related in the topic under the auspices of acceleration, academic achievement acceleration, I would also be very interested to broaden that scope beyond addressing this school year, but perhaps coincident with the strategic design outcomes of preparedness of our students for their next step, whatever that next step is. Was it college? Was it community college? Was it workforce? And where we are in making sure that they're connected into where they need to go and be prepared for where they need to go. And I'm keeping that broad on purpose because I think some creative proposals, I'm sure, could be put to on the table. I'm not necessarily asking for some bunch of data tables on test numbers, but something maybe more holistic, again, under that umbrella of academic achievement, academic acceleration. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Lindsay.
One would be a deep dive on our SPED department, talking to parents and taking the school tours. It's a common theme that keeps coming up, is issues related to our SPED department. So just like to do a deep dive there. And then also another one is security. We've redone our offices, but I also hear a lot of complaints with the other end of our campus with our gates, and review our practices with our school gates.
Okay, thank you. Vice President Sanowski?
Yes. I would like for, considering the presentation tonight on our healthcare expenses, I would like for our district to create some preventative healthcare incentives for our employees to pursue better personal health. I also would really like for us to make sure that we're doing a great job with the healthcare options summaries presented to employees. And that is it. Oh, no, one more. Summer learning opportunities. I'm looking forward to hearing about some summer learning opportunities, whether it's remediation or enrichment, that will be provided to all of our students in all of our communities.
Thank you. Are there any further matters that board members would like to be placed on future agenda items? As future agenda items. The board will now move to agenda item 12, dates of upcoming meetings. The next meeting is our special meeting, Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021 at 5 p.m. at the MDA here. Following that, we have a meeting on Tuesday, March 16th, 2021 at 6 p.m. and that is a regular governing board meeting. Moving on to agenda item 13, governing board reports. Do any board members have any governing board reports? Board Member Beckman?
I think like the rest of the board members, I'm touring some of the campuses and have been for a while. I wanted to note I had a great visit with Principal Jay, I won't even attempt his last name, at Arcadia. And it was great to see that leadership at the school is strong, witness the new wonderful improved parking lot, and hear about some great things that are going on at the school, including their Saturday kind of school that they're having, where they had anticipated, I think, like maybe less than 10 people would show up, and I think the PTO had 60 kids show up to kind of really, it's kind of a study hall type of thing. So that was fantastic. Second thing to report is, I think the board knows I'm working on the Coronado Promise with the Charos and the Coronado Foundation for the Future. They did receive, the Foundation for the Future did receive the first $50,000 installment of the $1 million commitment that they said they were getting from the donor. So they are moving forward, and we're having meetings surrounding that about how to broaden that up. So it's exciting stuff.
Thank you. Do any other, Board Member Hartwells?
I just want to share, I've been also doing many site visits like all of you, and I just want to thank all of you who have hosted me so graciously on campuses, and specifically thank the principals, the teacher, the staff, and the students. Your compliance with masks are outstanding. So thank you. I enjoy those visits very much, learning from you, and I look forward to continuing those collaborations. I also want to mention that I was fortunate enough to participate in the virtual Girls in STEM Night event hosted by our Saguaro Math and Science Academy, Scottsdale Math and Science Academy. And it was outstanding, and I thought the questions by our young learners were very adventurous, insightful, and it gave me, it warmed my heart to hear the questions that the young learners were asking. It was a great event. So I was glad to see they were here tonight and that we recognized that. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Sanowski?
Sure. Yes, I've enjoyed the campus visits. I can't wait for us to get a grasp of our marketing as a district, because there's so much good that's going on. And until you're able to go to all of the campuses, and it's unfortunate that our principals aren't able to do exchanges with other principals and teachers aren't able to do that more because there's so much great stuff going on, even during this health pandemic. So it's been wonderful to see that. I had a really fun opportunity. He's trying not to laugh over there. Participating in some filming with Casey the Cougar from Kiva Elementary at the Best Buy store. I had such a good time with that process. It was a lot of fun. And Assistant Principal Matt Gromick does a great job. He is that enthusiast for that campus. Both Dr. Hartwells and I had the opportunity to join in on a great conversation that was hosted by Stand Indivisible, the Arizona Council of Jewish Women and Black Mothers Caucus, discussing the school-to-prison pipeline. Having the opportunity to listen in on the gifted education, multi-age conversation was very enlightening. Our SUSD DEI meeting using Basecamp, that was a new technology for me, but I'm seeing what a great resource that is. And then continuing with the work with the National Education Association, with Leaders for Just Schools. I do look forward to seeing and participating in our work that starts tomorrow morning, for our strategic plan, because I do believe that's going to create that form that we desire in our district to then move forward and become even better.
Do any other board members have any reports? I would just like to note that we received I don't even know if there is a pronunciation for it, but the GPEMC, AZEMC legislative update report, and I did have time to run through it this morning very quickly. There are a number of bills that the board members and the public may wish to review. Senate Bill 1452, the voucher expansion bill, was voted out of the Senate today. We also have HB 2435. This would limit governing board roles to people who have children or grandparents or guardians, although it doesn't to the board with only a couple so-called at-large members, although it doesn't exactly explain what would happen if your student then left the district or in fact leaves out a number of issues. However, one of the things I noted in terms of our colleagues, because we are members of ASBA, is the term limit that would be proposed in this to 8 years. Because we haven't had in-person meetings with other school boards, such like at the law conference in the summers, you may actually, when you attend, meet board members who have served on their boards, especially in rural districts, for 12, 16, 20 years. This would completely disenfranchise people who have been staple members of their community. So that is something to consider. And then also SB 1456, the opt-in to sex education, but there are various issues there as well. So just some bills for the community and our board to be aware of and spend some time reviewing. The chair moves to adjourn this regular meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board on February 16th, 2021 at 8:17 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Beckman seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board adjourn this meeting at 8:18 p.m. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The motion is adjourned at 8:18 p.m.